Hogwarts. What bad intentions could a little badger have? Chapter 21. That makes sense. Blake agreed with Dumbledore's statement. But he had a feeling that it was not that simple. After all, that place had been abandoned. And he was a failure. He was also abandoned in that place. No one cared about him for decades. However, 11 years ago. Why would anyone suddenly think of him? There seemed to be no way to find the answer to this question now. However, Blake soon thought of another thing that was even more. Something exciting. Blake looked at Dumbledore. He said slowly. So, strictly speaking, he said. The two of you can be considered my. Blake did not continue. But Dumbledore completely understood what he meant. So, he and Grindelwald, these two old men, were almost 200 years old together. Then, suddenly, they had a son. Although this matter sounded very absurd. And it was the sin of that old Grindelwald. But Blake's and Grindelwald's blood indeed flowed in his body. Therefore, Blake could really be said to be the direct descendant of him and Grindelwald. Otherwise, Phoenix Fox would not have regarded Blake as a member of the Dumbledore family. Even when Blake was threatened, he could sense that Blake needed help. Dumbledore thought of this. He could not help but facepalm with his hand. However, it did not matter if this child was Grindelwald's former experimental subject or not. He had already determined that he was a member of the Dumbledore family. Dumbledore decided that he must teach Blake to be a good person. He was an outstanding wizard. Well, although he was also considered a direct descendant of Grindelwald. But Dumbledore still decided to let Blake stay away from that guy. You have the blood of the Dumbledore family flowing in your body. So, I hope that you can return to the Dumbledore family. But, you have to agree to this. Blake looked at Dumbledore's sincere gaze. A moment later. I'm sorry, Professor, I need to think about it. Dumbledore heard Blake call him Professor. His eyes dimmed slightly. Dumbledore was actually an old man who yearned for family. Especially after the accidental death of his sister Ariana. Even though he still had a younger brother. However, his younger brother could be considered as a stranger to him now. Therefore, strictly speaking, it had been a very, very long time since he had tasted kinship. Until now, a Blake appeared. Blake was also considered a member of the Dumbledore family. Therefore, deep in Dumbledore's heart, he hoped that Blake would agree to his request. In that case, perhaps he could still live in this lonely old age. Once again, he enjoyed the warmth brought by family. Dumbledore said softly. You really should think about it. You grew up here. Lady Marian is also very good to you. So, I know. This is not an easy decision to make. Even if you're not willing in the end, I won't force you. That's right, no matter what your final decision is. Don't tell others that your surname is Grindelwald. As for the reason, you've heard the story of Grindelwald from me. So, you should be able to understand. After all, until now, there are still many people who hate this surname. Blake nodded. I understand, Professor. When Dumbledore came. Before dinner in the afternoon. But when he left, the sky was already full of stars. He didn't know why. He stayed in the room with Dumbledore. For a few hours. Madame Marian didn't disturb them, not even once. Blake was actually a little puzzled by this. Dumbledore was a stranger in the orphanage. How could she be at ease leaving a stranger alone with a child in the orphanage for so long? Blake thought that Dumbledore had cast a spell. But, when he saw Madame Marian sitting quietly at the dining table in the dining hall, he knew that wasn't the case. Are you done talking? Come and eat. This is salmon soup and your favorite spaghetti. Although it's not as delicious as yours. After Madame Marian saw Blake, she quickly got up and prepared. The lid was opened. The food inside was still steaming hot. Madame Marian. Blake felt that she was a little strange. And her voice was especially nasal. It was as if she had cried. Eat, you should be hungry. Okay. When Blake picked up the fork and started to eat the pasta, Madame Marian grabbed her handkerchief. She looked at Blake uneasily. In the end, she spoke. The old man who came to see you this afternoon is your relative, right? Ahem. Blake choked at Madame Marian's words. Why do you think so? Madame Marian sighed. I've been the director of this orphanage for many years. I still have this bit of eyesight. That old man and you have the exact same beautiful azure pupils. Blake was silent. So, I understand. It's time for you to leave this place, isn't it? It's not like I have to leave, Blake said gloomily. This is a good thing, good boy. Although I don't know why you were abandoned here. But, I actually hope that the children in the orphanage. I actually hope that the children can be adopted in the future. And then have a home. Orphans with no one to rely on are really, too pitiful. Late at night. In the woods outside the orphanage. Blake looked at the big brown bear sitting on the ground. He excitedly ate the salmon that he had brought for him. Sure enough, it didn't hunt anything outside. If it wasn't for Blake's meal, it would probably starve to death. From now on, you'll be called Big Bear. Blake suddenly said. Big Bear called out a few times. Then, he stuffed another fish into his mouth. Blake, who could understand it? He chuckled. Just because you're called Big Bear doesn't mean that you'll have a brother called Second Bear in the future. Big Bear pondered for a while. What about Shang 3? You should continue eating. Blake looked at Big Bear's dried rice. He thought about Lady Marion's words. Lady Marion knew Dumbledore, who was suspected to be Blake's relative. He came to the orphanage this time. She must be thinking of adopting Blake back to her family. In this regard, she expressed her support. She deeply understood how important it was for an orphan to have a home. Maybe I should really follow Dumbledore and leave this place. Of course, Blake didn't say that he wanted a home. He didn't think there was anything wrong with being an orphan. He was just thinking about the future. If he left with Dumbledore, from then on, Dumbledore would stand behind him. He associated it with his blood pressure soaring system. It seems that if I don't want to be beaten to death in the future, it's better to leave with Dumbledore. For so many days. After Blake's test, his emotional treasure chest system. Anger had the highest drop rate. And it was the easiest to trigger. The second was shock and other emotions. So, for the reward. For the sake of becoming stronger. Blake might do some things more often in the future. Something more exciting. Dancing in minefields should be inevitable. What did it mean by, death is like the wind, always with me? However, if Dumbledore was standing behind him, as long as he didn't go overboard, then he wouldn't really be beaten to death. If he was lucky enough to make Dumbledore angry, then he was even less afraid. Someone like Dumbledore. If he was angry, the drop rate would definitely be high. Although it might be a little detestable. But, what bad intentions did the child have? I just want to become stronger. Blake was also because of this. He gradually made up his mind. Blake didn't actually have much luggage. Most of the things were distributed to the other children. He was carrying a small suitcase. He looked at the small room where he had lived for many years with some reluctance. Madame Marion was standing at the door waiting for him. Her eyes were red as she looked at the child quietly. Madame Marion, don't be sad. I'll come back to see you often. Quote. Blake put down the suitcase. He gave Madame Marion a deep hug. I heard that your relative is a professor. I believe that your life will definitely become better in the future. Blake smiled. A professor was indeed a professor. But he wasn't the kind of professor that Madame Marion had imagined. Blake waited until Madame Marion and the other children looked at him with reluctance. When he reached the door, Dumbledore was already standing at the door waiting. Goodbye, everyone. I'll come back to see everyone often. Dumbledore and Blake walked for a long time. When they looked back, they could still see Madame Marion and the other children standing at the door watching them silently. They walked past a corner. When they finally left their line of sight, Dumbledore said, okay, grab my hand. Then we'll use Phantom Shift to leave here. Quote. Well, Phantom Shift is a spell similar to teleportation. Although the process is not very comfortable, it's very practical. Dumbledore was worried that Blake didn't know what Phantom Shift was. So he explained patiently. Magic is really amazing, Blake praised sincerely. Okay, come on. Grab my hand. Dumbledore said with a smile. But, Professor, I suddenly remembered that I forgot to bring a pet. If I don't bring it, it will be hungry. Oh, it doesn't matter. Let's bring it along before we leave. Quote. What pet? Where is it? Quote. Blake pointed to the woods not far away. In that forest. It's a hamster, a Siberian hamster. Let's go. 5 minutes later. Dumbledore looked at the behemoth in front of him. he said helplessly. This is the Siberian hamster you mentioned. This was obviously a brown bear. Look at its size. Although it was considered small for a brown bear. But it was at least 5 or 600 pounds. How could you say that this was a hamster? But, at this moment, Blake was stroking Big Bear's head. Big Bear was a ferocious beast. But now it was lying on the ground obediently. It allowed the boy to stroke it. Dumbledore was still shocked by this scene. SS's, when Grindelwald was doing experiments, did he add Newt's blood? Otherwise, how could he make such a fierce beast so docile? Ding. Detected emotions of shock. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest. Quote. Hearing the system notification. Blake's lips curled up slightly. This was the reason why he brought Dumbledore to see his little pet. Unfortunately, it was only a silver treasure chest. If it's such a big bear. Dumbledore wanted to say that such a big bear was not easy to raise. Moreover, it was not easy to use phantom transfiguration with a bear. But, when he saw Blake staying with the brown bear, when he saw the joy in his eyes, he gave up the idea in his heart. Wasn't it just a bear? As long as Blake liked it, then he would raise it. Professor, can't we bring it with us? No way. No. Quote. Of course I have a way. Dumbledore said with a smile. Can you lend me your suitcase? Okay. Blake handed his suitcase to Dumbledore. Dumbledore put the suitcase on a big rock. Then, he took out the few pieces of clothing he had in there. He put them aside. Then, he pulled out his old wand. He didn't seem to chant any spells. It was as if there was some kind of special space distortion in the box. Okay. Dumbledore closed the box. Then he handed it to Blake. As long as you face it and open the lid, you can put it in. The space inside is big enough. It won't feel suffocated. Quote. Blake took the suitcase in surprise. This was. Dumbledore had helped him transform his suitcase into a bag that could hold magical animals. Blake turned his head and touched Big Bear's head. Then he whispered a few words into its ear. Then, he opened the suitcase. The next second, Big Bear was sucked into the box without any resistance. Okay. Now, we can leave. Quote. When we reach our new home, we'll let it out. Quote. Dumbledore took out a piece of cloth as he spoke. It turned into a small bag. Then he put Blake's clothes in it. After we get to our new home and familiarize ourselves with the environment, we'll go to Diagon Alley. It's time to buy some school supplies for you. Quote. Ah, and the most important wand. By the way, I won't give you the admission letter. I'll get the owl to send it to you. I can't spoil the surprise of receiving an admission letter. Blake heard Diagon Alley. His eyes lit up. Could he finally go to Diagon Alley? If he went to Diagon Alley, then he would be able to have his own magic wand. Blake had always been casting spells without a wand. He really wanted to try out how it felt to cast a spell with a magic wand. Moreover, when he reached Diagon Alley, he could buy the books he wanted. Transfiguration, Alchemy, Ancient Niven. He could arrange everything directly. Godric Valley. Dumbledore looked at the small town. His eyes were full of memories. At this time, Blake was leaning against the wall. He stood on the side and calmed his turbulent stomach. Why was Phantom Shift so uncomfortable? Blake thought. Maybe it was the same reason why Muggles would get carsick. Professor Dumbledore. An unfamiliar middle-aged man quickly walked over. Mr. Pierre. Mr. Pierre excitedly shook Dumbledore's hand. We've already done what you asked us to do. Here are the keys. Quote. Mr. Pierre took out a bunch of keys. He handed it to Dumbledore. Thank you very much, Mr. Pierre. You are still so capable. Quote. Thank you for the compliment. Professor Dumbledore, if you need help again next time, remember to come to me. Quote. Monsieur Pierre left in excitement. His eyes were full of Dumbledore. He didn't even look at Blake. That gentleman must be your top fan, right? That's what Muggles say, a super fan. After Blake calmed down, he walked over with a suitcase. Ah, maybe he just likes some of the way I do things. Not really, a fan. Dumbledore said modestly. Okay, the new house has been arranged. Dumbledore shook the keys in his hand. To be exact, this is my ancestral home, but, since, I haven't been back for a long time. Quote. So I guess I asked Mr. Pierre and his team to help me renovate it. Dumbledore's ancestral home was located on the edge of town. It was a small two-story house. In front of the house was a small barren garden. Behind it was a lush hill. It was basically built on the hill. Seeing the woods, Blake was intoxicated by the fragrance of the plants. Great. Shang Daphne can stay there. Quote. And the small garden in front, I think I can cultivate a lot of interesting plants there. Blake liked this place. At least, he could safely grow some strange plants here. He wouldn't be noticed. After all, this was a place where half wizards and half muggles lived. However, most of the wizards had set up muggle expulsion spells in their homes. It was rare for them to discover anything strange about the wizard's home. Even if he found something strange, they would also think that it was haunted. As for the lush and verdant back mountain, according to Dumbledore, that piece of land belonged to the Dumbledore family. Blake thought about where he should hide his magical animals in the future. Put the luggage away. Then, he released Big Bear. Blake started to look at Dumbledore with wide eyes. He could slowly familiarize himself with his new home. But Diagon Alley. He wanted to go now. Okay, I was going to introduce you to the neighbors. However, since you want to go to Diagon Alley now. After experiencing the phantom transfiguration once, Yi Zichen's eyes lit up. Blake didn't feel so bad anymore. Dumbledore did not take him to the leaky cauldron. Instead, he used Phantom Shift to appear at the entrance of Diagon Alley. After Blake got used to the dizziness caused by Phantom Shift, he started to panic. He curiously looked at the legendary Diagon Alley. Blake found himself standing on a street paved with cobblestones. Behind him was a brick wall. Behind the wall should be the leaky cauldron. The soft sunlight shone on a pile of crucibles outside the nearest shop. There was a sign hanging above the crucibles. Copper, brass, all models, automatic mixing, foldable. Blake pointed at the crucibles and asked, "What is this?" "This is a crucible. It's used to boil magic potions." Dumbledore patiently explained to Blake. "Oh, can it be used to cook hot pot?" Dumbledore smiled and replied, "It should be possible. Actually, I haven't done that before. I guess no one has done that before. But we can go back and try it ourselves." Diagon Alley could be said to be the central business district of the British Wizards. It was much wider than Blake had imagined, and there were many shops. However, it was such a wide street. It was almost full of people. It was very lively. "Let's go. I think, what you're most interested in is getting a magic wand. Isn't it?" Blake followed behind Dumbledore. It was the first time he stepped on the cobblestone street of Diagon Alley. He followed behind Dumbledore and kept looking at the surrounding shops. There were all kinds of strange shops. Blake didn't know what they were selling. Of course, to fit the image of a Muggle child. As they walked, Blake asked questions along the way. Although his questions were a bit strange. For example, dragon's liver, 16 psyches for an ounce. How much is 1 psyche worth? Can this dragon's liver be fried? Quote. Why did they have to surround a broom? Don't they have brooms to sweep the floor at home? Quote. However, Dumbledore still patiently answered Blake's various questions. Soon, they arrived at their destination. Compared to other shops, this shop was different. It was small and shabby. The golden sign on the door had peeled off. It was written on it. Ollivander, made in 382 BC, excellent wand. In the window of the shop, there was a lone magic wand on the faded purple cushion. "Let's go in," Dumbledore said with a smile. Blake expectantly followed Dumbledore into the shop. However, as soon as they walked in, a voice rang out. Not far away, a little girl in a green dress appeared. She had long, soft, and flowing blonde hair. There was a hint of habitual arrogance on her pretty face. Professor Dumbledore. Who's the boy beside him? To be able to make Professor Dumbledore personally come to Diagon Alley to buy school supplies. Her curiosity was instantly piqued. Blake looked at the interior of the famous magic wand shop. The shop was very small. Because there was only a bench in the corner. There was nothing else. And behind the tall counter, thousands of narrow cardboard boxes containing magic wands. From the floor to the ceiling, there was a thin layer of dust everywhere. Blake was a little skeptical. The reason why Ollivander didn't clean up the dust was because Ollivander didn't clean it up. It was to give his shop a sense of history. Oh, Professor Dumbledore. What a rare guest. Quote, I remember that your wand was made by my grandfather. That's a good wand. But I'm sure you don't use it anymore, right? Ollivander was a rather skinny little old man. His messy hair betrayed his slovenly personality. His silver-white eyes left a deep impression on people. Good afternoon, Garrick. I'm here to buy this child a magic wand that belongs to him. Dumbledore reached out his hand with a smile. He pushed Blake, who was standing in the back, to the front. This is the grandson of an old friend of mine. Blake Green. Dumbledore didn't ask Blake to change his surname to Dumbledore. Perhaps it was because he didn't know how to explain it to others. Why would the Dumbledore family suddenly have a descendant? As for the surname Grindelwald, it was even more impossible to use it. Therefore, he could only tacitly agree to Blake's surname, Green. And he planned to tell others. Blake was the grandson of his old friend. However, after all, appearances couldn't be deceived. Especially an old guy like Ollivander who had seen countless people. Ollivander's eyes swept back and forth between Dumbledore's face and Blake's face. The old friend you're talking about, you're not yourself, right? He was most afraid of the sudden silence in the air. After Ollivander blurted it out. He regretted it a little. Something that others were hiding. Naturally, there were reasons why others should hide it. But fortunately, the awkward atmosphere did not last long. Ring ring ring. The sound of the bell came from the door. It broke the awkward atmosphere. Ahem, miss, please wait for a moment. I have to choose a magic wand for Mr. Green, who came first. Ollivander called out to the young lady in the green dress. Then, he glanced at Dumbledore apologetically. Dumbledore nodded slightly, indicating that he did not mind. Of course, Blake also noticed the young lady who had just entered. Then, he immediately recognized who she was. Although he did not know why she would appear in an era without her in advance. But, what did it matter? Blake only knew one thing. And that was, look, a new treasure chest tool man had appeared. Although Blake's inner drama was very good. But in fact, he only glanced at it lightly and then looked away. Mr. Ollivander turned his head and smiled at Blake. Which hand is Mr. Green used? Blake wanted to say that he could use both hands. But in order to get the most suitable magic wand for himself, he answered Ollivander's question honestly. Right hand. Okay. Ollivander picked up a small notebook and wrote something. Then, a pool on the counter flew up by itself. It automatically helped Blake to measure his size, including the length of his arm, the length of his forearm, the height, the circumference of his head, even the spacing between his nostrils. After busying himself for a while, Ollivander finally put away the notebook. He began to walk to the magic wand shelf behind him. Obviously, the data measured just now was very important. It could help Ollivander find a reasonable range among thousands of magic wands. It might be suitable for Blake's range. This. It might be this. Why don't you give it a try? Oh, of course, how could I forget you? Quote, comma. It was as if he could hear the magic wand talking. Ollivander soon returned with a pile of boxes. He stacked the boxes on the counter with difficulty. Then, he rubbed his palms. He looked at Blake eagerly. Every time, a young wizard would come to buy a magic wand. He was looking forward to this scene. Every time a magic wand found a suitable master. He had the unique excitement of an old father. Your compatibility seems to be suitable for many types of wands. Then, try this one. Ollivander casually took out a box from the pile. Then he opened the lid. He gently picked up one of the wands. Then, it was reversed. He handed the handle of the wand to Blake. Yellow sen wood, unicorn fur, 12¼ inches, very elastic. Blake wiped his hands. He held the wand in his hand excitedly. In fact, this was the first time he had picked up a wand. Last time, he was very regretful. He didn't borrow Hermione's magic wand to try. Now, he finally touched a real magic wand. Blake only felt a warm feeling coming from the magic wand in his hand. Oh, it seems to be very suitable. Why don't you try waving it? Quote. Ollivander didn't resist when he saw the magic wand. He immediately became excited. Could it be that the first one would succeed? Blake did have a very strange feeling at this moment. He felt that his magic power had been increased. Actually, it wasn't his magic power that had been increased. It was like the channel for casting magic power had been widened. If it was said that when there was no magic wand to cast spells, the channel for releasing magic power, it was a small river. Then now, it was a turbulent and worshipping river. The overall feeling was very good. Very good. After hearing Ollivander say to wave the magic wand. Then he waved it. Whoosh. As Blake waved the magic wand gently. Then, a breeze blew in the entire shop. Oh. Very good. Very good. Ollivander had yet to finish his words. The dust that was blown up by the breeze suddenly turned into a drizzle. They fluttered down to the ground. Ah. I knew it. You're very suitable for this. Ollivander had yet to finish his words. The next second. Bang. There was a loud sound. The wand in Blake's hand. It exploded just like that. Blake looked at the wand in his hand in shock. The wand with the tip of the wand blown into a trumpet flower. He didn't know what to say for a moment. The shop fell into an awkward silence again. Ding. 3 types of shock have been detected. Quote. Ding. Currently drawing treasure chests for the host. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 3 silver treasure chests. Quote. Blake knew very well who these 3 treasure chests came from. He secretly glanced at the dumbstruck Ollivander. That, cough cough, do I have to compensate? Ollivander finally came back to his senses. He hurriedly waved his hand. Oh, of course not, child. In fact, this should be my mistake. How can I let the customer bear the loss? Under normal circumstances, it was only when he took the wrong wand. Only then would he discover the phenomenon of the wand exploding. However, this was only a theoretical possibility. After all, let's not talk about him. Let's talk about the Ollivander family. They had been in the wand business for so many years. When the customer tried the wand, if it wasn't suitable, at most, it would blow up a few windows. A few walls. He had never seen a wand explode itself. Ollivander carefully took the exploded wand from Blake's hand. Then, he put it away properly. He had to study this wand properly after that. What exactly was the problem? He was sure that this was just a small accident. Then, Ollivander took out a second wand. Mahogany wood, dragon heart string wand core, 11 inches, very flexible. This is a wand very suitable for transformation. Ollivander secretly glanced at Dumbledore. The child of the Dumbledore family. Of course, his talent in transformation was very high. This time, it couldn't be wrong. Blake took the wand. Then, he was pleasantly surprised. This wand was more convenient than the previous one. Blake used the wand to point at a box on the table. Then, the box instantly changed. A lifelike white pigeon flapped its wings and flew into the air. Oh, what a wonderful transformation spell. Quote. Ollivander exclaimed in shock. He had never seen an 11-year-old little wizard who could directly turn a dead object into a living thing. Dumbledore had a gratified smile on his face. Of course, he knew Blake's transformation. As expected of, Ollivander looked at Dumbledore. Cough cough, Dumbledore suddenly coughed. Ollivander slammed on the brakes. He swallowed the rest of his words. Ding. 2 strong emotions of shock have been detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 2 gold treasure chests. Quote. 2 gold treasure chests. Except for Ollivander. The other contributor was, of course, the little girl in the green dress who was still sitting on the bench. She stared at Blake's back with her big emerald green eyes. Her face was full of disbelief. Ollivander said with a smile, it seems that this wand is very suitable. Bang. Ollivander's voice stopped abruptly. I don't believe it. Continue to try this one. The self-destruction of the wand meant that he had made a mistake. This was ruining his reputation. So, how could he tolerate it? So, in the next 10 minutes or so, the people who passed by Ollivander's wand shop, they could always clearly hear the sound of explosions coming from the shop outside the door. Why don't I try another one? He looked at the table with his head in his hands. Ollivander's face was ashen. Blake said cautiously. Ollivander jumped up. No. I beg you, don't try anymore. Why don't you change to another scourge? Quote. The Grigovic family is not bad, although they are in Germany. Cassandra stared at him with her beautiful big green eyes. She looked at this scene in shock. Mr. Ollivander. He had the technology to make wands. On a worldwide scale, he was ranked in the top 3. Even if he was ranked first, he could afford to be. But now, he was such a world-class wand master. He was actually stumped by that boy. And he looked. And he seemed to be showing signs of breaking down. This was truly an inconceivable matter. Cassandra was a proud child. Because since she was young, no matter in which aspect, both of them were extremely talented. They were far more outstanding than their peers. Because of this, among her peers, there were really not many who could catch her eye. Too invincible. What she brought was loneliness and emptiness. This year, she was going to enter Hogwarts. So she was still looking forward to meeting someone who was qualified to be her opponent in school. So, when she saw Professor Dumbledore, such a powerful and famous wizard, he actually personally sent a child to Diagon Alley to buy things. Her curiosity was piqued. What kind of person was he? How could he be worthy of being personally received by a great wizard like Dumbledore? Perhaps this boy was capable enough to be her opponent. It just so happened that she hadn't bought a wand yet. Hence, she followed behind Blake and Dumbledore. She entered the wand shop. Then she saw Blake blow up the wand. To be honest, even though her family had a long history, she had never heard of such a thing. Even though she claimed to have seen the world, she couldn't help but be surprised by this. Because of this, Cassandra unknowingly contributed a silver treasure chest to Blake. It seems that this guy is really interesting. Cassandra, who had this thought. Because of this, she continued to watch curiously. When Blake picked up the second wand, and when he successfully turned a box into a lifelike little white dove. Only then did Cassandra truly feel shocked. Because she couldn't do that. Cassandra remembered herself not long ago. Under the serious guidance of his parents. It took a whole week. That's why I used my mother's magic wand, turning a match into a flawless silver needle. At that time, her parents were pleasantly surprised that she was the genius of the Worley family. Because she wasn't even 11 years old at that time. The magic power in his body was limited. He was able to do this. It was already very impressive. But now, this boy was about his age. Unexpectedly, when he was testing the wand, turning an inanimate object into a bird. How was this possible? Her father had clearly told her that. Because there wasn't enough magic. Right now, she still couldn't do that. Then why could that boy do it? However, although Cassandra was not convinced, but she had to admit it. The current me, he really couldn't do it. He really couldn't do it. From a young age to an adult. This was the first time Cassandra had lost to someone her age. Cassandra was shocked. A trace of hostility rose in his heart. HMPH. I admit that you have the ability to be my opponent. Quote. However, if I also had a great wizard like Professor Dumbledore to teach me. Quote. I can do it too. Cassandra thought, unwilling to admit defeat. Comma. Ding. Detected shock. Quote. Ding. Extracting the treasure chest for the host. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a gold treasure chest. Quote. Blake turned his head. He saw the expression on Cassandra's face. Naturally, he knew who contributed this gold treasure chest. Before he could think further, the system notification sounded again. Ding. Detected great frustration. Quote. Ding. Extracting the treasure chest for the host. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a diamond treasure chest. Quote. Although he was happy to obtain a diamond treasure chest again. But, looking at his ashen face, Ollivander, who had contributed a diamond treasure chest to him, Blake couldn't be happy. First of all, such a big wand shop. There wasn't even a wand that was suitable for him. In other words, he wouldn't be able to buy a new wand today. Secondly, today, Ollivander was a little miserable because of him. Even though he didn't do it on purpose. I'm sorry, Garrick. I'll compensate you for today's losses. Dumbledore sighed. Then he took out a money bag. He placed it gently on the counter. In fact, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that Ollivander had suffered heavy losses today. More than 80 wands had exploded. According to the price of about 7 gold galleons per wand. That was a huge loss of more than 500 gold galleons. Although Dumbledore didn't know why such a thing had happened. He guessed that it might have something to do with Blake's background. After all, he was a new life form that had been cultivated in a petri dish. Compared to an ordinary wizard, there must be something different about it. Don't worry, Blake. As for the wand, I'll think of a way. Dumbledore comforted Blake. He knew very well that a little wizard yearned for a wand. So he knew very well. When a little wizard couldn't buy a new wand. The disappointment in his heart. Wait. Just as Dumbledore was about to pull Blake away from this place, Ollivander suddenly raised his head. He stopped them. Blake saw the unwillingness in his eyes. I'm not short of money. Albus Ideographic period. Although Mr. Grimm blew up so many of my wands. You've brought me an unprecedented challenge. I shouldn't be afraid of challenges. Ollivander thought of how he had wanted Blake to go to Germany to find his old colleagues. He couldn't help but feel a little ashamed. He was the world's top wand master. How could he admit defeat so easily? Mr. Grimm. Ollivander walked out from behind the counter. He held Blake's arm. Obviously, there's no wand in the shop that suits you now. So, I'm going to tailor a wand for you. Blake looked at Ollivander's bloodshot pupils. How can I accept this? He had blown up more than 80 wands. But the other party didn't want his compensation. And he wanted to tailor a wand for him. Please don't reject me, Mr. Grimm. I can guarantee that if I can't solve this problem, other wand craftsmen can't solve it either. And, I feel that this is a great opportunity for me to break through my current skills. He looked at Ollivander, who seemed to have gone crazy. Blake calmly pulled his arm out of his hands. Tailor a wand for him. Of course, it was good. After all, you don't want to be unable to use a wand in the future, right? This sentence hit Blake's weakness. Okay, I agree. That's great. Thank you. Quote. Ollivander excitedly gave Blake a big hug. This scene made Cassandra, who was at the side, confused again. They're about to blow up your store. Quote. You're still thanking him. In order to be able to truly customize a wand that completely suits you, I may need you to come once a day for the next 2 days. Because I may need to adjust some parameters. Mr. Ollivander said excitedly. At this moment, his motivation was also stimulated. This was the first time in so many years. The last time he was so motivated. And it was when he completed the test that his father gave him. Dumbledore did not object. If Ollivander could solve this problem, then it would naturally save him a lot of trouble. He picked up a wand that was blown up by Blake. He carefully examined it. Although he did not do much research on wands. But no matter what, this subject was related to alchemy. Therefore, he was able to see through the clues very quickly. He put down the blown-up wand. He glanced at Blake. A trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. These wands. They were all destroyed by an extremely large amount of magic power. Blake, this child, actually had such powerful magic power. How old was this child? Did he already have more magic power than an adult adept? What would happen when he grew up? There was a faint trace of fear in his heart. If the experiment back then had succeeded, this child who had inherited all his and Grindelwald's talents, he would definitely have become Grindelwald's sharpest sword. Mr. Grimm, can you tell me how you felt when you held the wand? Ollivander picked up a book. He picked up a quill and looked at Blake seriously. Well, when I held the wand for the first time, there was a very strong urge to cast a spell. Then after waving the wand, I felt very good. There was a kind of carefree feeling of venting excess energy. Blake remembered the feeling of casting a spell with the wand just now. A smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was a pity that that carefree feeling did not last long. The wand blew up. After Ollivander heard Blake's answer, he threw the book aside. Then he picked up a blown-up wand and carefully observed it. Then a shocked expression gradually appeared on his face. He had doubts when he heard Blake's answer. But now, after carefully examining the blown-up wand, he finally confirmed the guess in his heart. Then, Blake heard the system prompt again. Ding. It has been detected that the target has dropped a certain number of treasure chests today. Quote. Ding. The target will not drop any more treasure chests today. Quote. Blake sighed in his heart. However, why did Ollivander only drop 3 treasure chests before reaching the quota? He thought of the diamond treasure chest that Ollivander had just dropped. Blake instantly understood. It must be because of the quality of the treasure chest. The higher the quality of the treasure chest, The more space it occupied, the larger the quota. And vice versa. Hermione had only dropped silver and gold treasure chests. That was why there were so many drops. Ollivander didn't know what Blake was thinking. He glanced at Dumbledore. Mr. Green, you're really an amazing genius. Ollivander exclaimed. Dumbledore smiled. He knew that Ollivander had also seen the problem. However, this sentence made her sit at the back. Cassandra, who was ignored the whole time, found it irritating. Genius. This word. In the past, it had always been her patented term. No matter who it was, how could they be called a genius outside? But when he arrived in front of her, all of them were beaten back to their original state. But now, she had met her match. Humph, isn't it just that your transformation skill is better than mine? Cassandra thought sourly in her heart. Mr. Ollivander, why are you suddenly praising me? Mr. Green, can't you feel how powerful your magic power is? Ollivander said helplessly. The reason why these magic wands exploded. It's not that they're not suitable for you, but your magic power is too strong, it directly blew it up. Blake was stunned. So that was the case. When he tried out the magic wands just now, it was indeed as good as it could be. He didn't expect it at all. He used all his strength. He actually blew up the magic wands because of the excessive magic power input. After Cassandra, who was behind him, heard Ollivander's words. Her eyes widened again. This boy blew up the magic wands. It was actually because his magic power was too powerful. But, he was about the same age as her. Cassandra wouldn't suspect that Ollivander was lying. Because he didn't have to lie. Ding. Extremely shocked emotion detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 1 gold treasure chest. Quote. Blake received the system prompt again. Now, even if he didn't look back, he could guess the expression on Cassandra's face. She's really a little girl who doesn't want to admit defeat. Very good. Tool number 2 will be you. Quote. Dumbledore said, I also noticed this just now. Blake, your magic power, it's not the same as others. For example, when others use a magic wand to cast a spell, it's like turning on a faucet in a pool. No matter how much water there is in the pool, they can control the amount of water in the right place. As for you, to borrow a word from the Muggles, it's a high-pressure water gun. Casting spells is violent and violent. Thanks to Dumbledore's easy-to-understand analogy. Blake immediately understood. At the same time, he was also a little surprised. He didn't expect Dumbledore to know so much about the Muggles. So, as long as I take it easy and restrain myself, I won't blow up the magic wands. That's indeed the case, Dumbledore nodded. Cassandra didn't know what a high-pressure water gun was. But she could roughly understand what Dumbledore meant. That guy is actually so strong. He even has to restrain himself when using magic to not blow up the magic wands. No, I can't be worse than him. It could be said that Blake hadn't even spoken to Cassandra yet. Cassandra's defense was broken by Blake. Ding. Extremely depressed mood detected. Quote. Ding. Detected that the target has reached the limit of treasure chests dropped today. Quote. Ding. The target can no longer drop treasure chests today. Quote. Blake looked at the system space. Cassandra had contributed 1 silver treasure chest and 3 gold treasure chests. He couldn't help but raise his hand and touch his nose. This tool number 2. Really, she's too weak. I haven't even made a move yet. I've already cleaned her out. Although as long as you restrain yourself, you can prevent the wand from exploding. But, make a wand for the customer that is completely comfortable to use. This is the mission of the Ollivander family for so many years. Don't worry. I will definitely make a wand that allows you to cast magic freely. Quote. Ollivander comforted Blake. Then I'll have to trouble you, Garrick. Dumbledore expressed his gratitude. Ollivander nodded at Dumbledore. He secretly praised in his heart. Although he didn't know what relationship this child had with Dumbledore. But, look at his talent. This magic power. If not for the fact that Dumbledore was not young anymore. You mean this is his son? Even Ollivander would believe it. Just as the 2 adults were chatting, Blake took the time to glance at Cassandra behind him. She had her head lowered. He couldn't see her expression clearly. But from her small hands that were tightly gripping her skirt, he could tell that she was not calm inside. Blake actually had the beginner level of godly telekinesis. It came from the previous newbie gift pack. The beginner level of godly telekinesis might not be able to spy on a great wizard like Dumbledore. But this kind of little girl. Blake understood at a glance. Blake originally thought that she was just like Hermione. She was just slightly affected by him. Unexpectedly. This little girl actually broke through his defense. The corners of Blake's mouth curled up slightly. He liked this kind of stubborn little girl who wanted to be strong. There was no choice. The drop rate was too high. Alright, come on, Mr. Grimm. I have to measure the data for you again. This time it has to be more detailed. At this moment, Ollivander waved at Blake. However, Blake shook his head. Mr. Ollivander. Have you forgotten? Quote. There's a lady behind who has been waiting for a long time. Ollivander heard this. Then he looked at the little girl who was still sitting on the bench behind him. He couldn't help but let out a long, "Oh. I'm very sorry." Originally, he wanted to help Blake choose the wand first. Then, he would entertain the little girl. But he didn't expect Blake to be so difficult to deal with. More than 80 of his wands were blown up in a row. His Dao heart had almost been shattered by this little guy. It took him a lot of effort to muster up the energy. Naturally, he had completely forgotten about little invisible behind him. He quickly walked out from behind the counter. He came to Cassandra's side. He said very sincerely, I must apologize to you. It was really an accident just now. So, ahem, how about this, I'll pick a magic wand for you now. Also, consider this wand as a gift from me. I won't charge you for it. They had been there for a long time. The little girl had been waiting silently. He had waited for so long. He had forgotten about her. This was indeed impolite. It was not in keeping with his principles of doing business with the Ollivander family. Therefore, he decided to give her a magic wand as an apology. In any case, more than 80 of them had exploded today. Losing another one wouldn't be a big deal. No, I don't need it. Quote. I have money. Cassandra said stubbornly. Okay. Cassandra rejected his offer. This surprised Ollivander a little. But since she didn't need it, then forget it. Then, please come over. I'll pick a magic wand for you. Ollivander turned around and walked to the counter. No, Mr. Ollivander. Ollivander turned around in surprise. He looked at Cassandra. He didn't understand what Cassandra wanted to do. I also want a custom-made magic wand. A magic wand that suits me perfectly. Cassandra finished speaking. She glanced at Blake. Blake felt Cassandra's hostile gaze on him. Hey, this little girl is really interesting. I didn't offend you. Why are you so hostile? Tisk tisk. Hermione was indeed cuter. Although she had also been beaten up badly by him. But not only was she not hostile. She even sent him some candy from time to time. However, when he thought of Cassandra's personality, Blake figured it out. A strong and proud little girl. What you don't have, I want to have. What you have, I want to have more. And I want a better kind of person. After all, maybe since she was born. The blows she received, it wasn't even as many as she came today. After hearing Cassandra's request, Ollivander glanced at Blake in surprise. But he thought this little girl was surprised because she heard it. He wanted to custom make a magic wand for Blake. That was why he also wanted to get a custom-made magic wand. After all, a custom-made magic wand was indeed much easier to use. Usually, there were wizards who often asked him to custom-make magic wands. Of course, our shop also has a custom-made magic wand business. But the price may be relatively expensive. Ollivander said. It's okay. I said, I have money. Cassandra took out a money bag from her pocket. The pleasant sound of gold coins colliding came from the bag. Hiss, she really is a rich little girl. But Blake just sighed. He was interested in money. Actually, he wasn't very interested. After all, he wasn't really short of money. When he was in the orphanage, he was very rich. Not to mention that he was now adopted by Dumbledore. Then he was even more not short of money. Dumbledore had been the principal for so many years. He had also published many books and papers. Not to mention years of salary savings. Not to mention the royalties for those research papers and published books. He could retire on the spot without worrying about food and clothing. So, Blake was a member of the Dumbledore family. How could he be short of money? Oh, I don't need so much. Ollivander waved his hand and said. Since that's the case, then you come over too. I'll measure the data for you first. Then we can start work tonight to make a magic wand suitable for you. Seeing the money bag, he knew that this little girl must be the eldest daughter from a pure-blood family. So he agreed very quickly. Most pure-blood families were extremely rich. Of course, they were also extremely poor. It was clear that Cassandra belonged to the wealthy group. It would be a waste not to earn this money. Come on, come here and register. Then we'll start measuring. By the way, Albus, you guys go buy other things first. It's getting late. Ollivander reminded him. At this moment, Blake realized that it was almost 4:30 in the afternoon. Many shops in Diagon Alley would be closed at night. Therefore, they really had to hurry. Blake ignored Cassandra's hostile gaze. After leaving the magic wand shop, he began to go to various shops with Dumbledore to buy the things he needed. Except for the magic wand shop. The place that Blake was looking forward to the most. Naturally, it was the bookstore. There shouldn't be any more accidents in the bookstore today, right? He came out of Madame Morkan's clothing store. Blake went straight to Lihan bookstore next door. Dumbledore smiled as he looked at Blake's cheerful back. It was the same for him back then. The store he was most interested in. Except for the wand shop. It was a bookstore that could bring knowledge. Dumbledore looked at the child. A strange feeling suddenly rose in his heart. It was a feeling that he had not felt for a long time. Back then, before he became the principal. It was the same as Professor McGonagall. To lead the way for a little wizard from the Muggle world. The little wizard had seen a lot. Some of them had left a deep impression on him. But he had never felt the way he did today. Perhaps it was because those were other people's children. And this child was actually from his family. It was a strange feeling. Dumbledore smiled bitterly and shook his head. He did not know why. He suddenly thought of his sister, Ariana. If she had not died back then. If she had not fallen ill. Then she would have been like today. He would have brought her to buy things. Then he would have watched her enroll in school. Finally, he would have watched her slowly grow up with his own eyes. Dumbledore was stunned. This seemed to be the long-lost feeling of kinship. Blake came to the entrance of Lihan bookstore. He looked eagerly at the books inside. At this time, it was already evening. There were only a few customers in the store. It seemed that the bustling time had just passed. Let's go. Buy whatever books you like. Dumbledore said generously. Just as they were about to step into Lihan bookstore. An owl suddenly glided down from the sky. It had a letter in its mouth. Dumbledore frowned. When the owl approached him, it threw the letter directly at him. Dumbledore stretched out his hand. He caught the letter very agilely. He opened the letter and glanced at it. Then, he frowned again. Blake saw this scene. The corners of his mouth twitched involuntarily. He was just thinking about it. There shouldn't be any accidents in the bookstore, right? Now, the unexpected had happened. If you have something important to do, then you should hurry. Blake said obediently. Sorry, Blake, Dumbledore said apologetically. Blake didn't really care. Dumbledore was actually very busy. Apart from being busy with his school matters, he still had to make plans for that idiot minister of the Ministry of Magic. Because of this, he was able to find time to investigate his background. Then, he accompanied her to move and buy things. This was already very impressive. Blake couldn't ask for too much. Most importantly, Dumbledore wasn't around. Only then would he be able to act recklessly. Here's the pocket money I gave you. You can use it to buy books and other things that you like. But before I buy the book, I have to take a good look at the author's name. If it's under my name, then don't buy it. I'm sure I have more at home. Quote. Dumbledore blinked. By the way, get a room at the Broken Cauldron Bar tonight. After all, you have to go to Mr. Ollivander's place every day for the next few days. So, you have to stay in Diagon Alley for the next few days. Oh, by the way, don't worry about Shangda. I'll get someone to take care of him. I'll help you bring these things home first. Blake held the heavy bag of money. He replied with a smile, okay, please don't worry. Dumbledore nodded. He was more at ease with Blake. This child was indeed much more independent than other children. He watched Dumbledore's back view disappear around the corner with big and small bags. Blake was grinning from ear to ear. He stayed in Diagon Alley for a few days. And he was alone. Wonderful. He was alone. Then, he could go and buy some strange seeds. There were also some strange and magical animals. But for now, he had to buy all the books he was interested in. Otherwise, the bookstore would be closed. Blake was very efficient. He handed the book list to the clerk as soon as he entered the store. He asked the clerk to help him collect all the textbooks on the book list. Then he began to wander around the bookstore. There was something in Lihan bookstore that was very similar to the magic wand shop. That was, their shelves were stacked very high. They almost reached the ceiling. Blake didn't waste any time. He began to choose the books he wanted to buy. Soon, Blake's eyes were dazzled. Lihan bookstore was indeed the largest bookstore in Diagon Alley. There were all kinds of books. There were huge leather-bound books that were as big as the paved floor. There were pocket-sized silver books that were the size of postage stamps. Some books had messy symbols drawn in them. Some books didn't even have a single word in them. Blake even tripped over an invisible book that fell on the ground. Although there were many strange books. But there were more normal books. Blake searched for a long time. Finally, he found the books he was interested in. Application of Advanced Transfiguration. Introduction to Ancient Runes. Introduction to Alchemy. Soon, Blake moved all the books he was interested in down. Even if he didn't have any awakened talents, he was ready to buy books. For example, books on potions, herbology, and so on. After all, who knew what reward would appear in the next treasure chest? The clerk next to him looked at Blake with a smile. He had no choice. He had already helped him move the books back and forth 3 or 4 times. There were 5 or 6 books each time. This was a big customer. When the clerk returned to the counter with a few books again, Blake planned to look around again. Blake looked at the ceiling. There seemed to be a book with a red cover. However, just as he was staring at the book, he didn't look at the road and tripped again. Sorry. It was a little girl with 2 braids. Just now, she was squatting down to read the books at the bottom of the bookshelf. So Blake, who was looking up, didn't notice at all. Then, he tripped over her body. The little girl raised her head to look at Blake. Although Blake didn't mean it. But it also made her teary. After all, the scoundrel had tripped and fallen. He even accidentally stepped on the little girl's foot. Ding. Grievance detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining. Blake. He quickly helped the girl. I'm sorry. I was just reading the book on top. Quote. So I didn't notice. Maybe it was because of Blake's sincere apology. The little girl shook her head in the end. And, there's a dessert shop opposite the bookstore. Quote. Blake said happily. She didn't know if he was trying to make amends. Or he. The little girl seemed to be very shy. She had only said 2 words to Blake. Her ears turned red. She didn't look at Blake again. She picked up the book and walked out of the door quickly. She almost forgot to give him money. Help me send this part to Godric Valley. I'll take these books with me. Quote. At the counter of the bookstore. Blake swiftly settled the bill. Because Blake bought a lot of books. The bookstore even gave him a suitcase to hold the books. Although the space wasn't very big. But it could hold a lot of books. For these large shops, the traceless stretch spell within a certain specification. It was still allowed to be used. For example, the money bag produced by Gringotts. Blake carried the suitcase. He walked out of the bookstore. At this time, the sky had already darkened. The number of pedestrians on the street was gradually decreasing. Blake first went to Ollivander's wand shop. He completed today's data measurement. Because the afternoon was interrupted by Cassandra. So today's measurement hadn't been done yet. Then, he walked towards the street of Diagon Alley. He walked towards the location of the Broken Cauldron Bar. When he arrived in front of the brick wall again, Blake stopped in his tracks. He suddenly realized a very serious matter. Blake knew how to get from the Broken Cauldron Bar to Diagon Alley. But, how should he get back to the Broken Cauldron Bar from Diagon Alley? It didn't seem to be mentioned in the original work. Okay. Blake planned to use his finger that was infused with magic to try knocking on it first. After all, he didn't have a wand yet. If it didn't work, he would go back and ask Mr. Ollivander. Suddenly, A small figure appeared beside him. It's you. We meet again. Quote. Blake said happily. Wasn't this the little girl he met in the bookstore just now? She definitely knew how to get in. The little girl raised her head timidly. After seeing that it was Blake, her face was slightly red again. Hello, she said in a low voice. Well, I'm really sorry about what happened in the bookstore just now. It's fine. It's just an accident. The little girl looked away. She didn't seem to dare to look at Blake. Ah, you're so nice. Quote. I'm not. She heard the boy praising her. The little girl lowered her head shyly. My name is Blake Green. Blake extended his right hand towards the little girl. My name is Hannah, Hannah Abo. Hannah reached out and touched Blake's hand gently before pulling it back. This time, even his neck turned red. Hannah made of iron. Blake almost cried out in surprise. Fortunately, he restrained himself. Otherwise, he would be given a nickname the first time he introduced himself. That would not be good. Hello. Can I call you Hannah? Quote. It was obvious that Hannah was not good at rejecting people. Of course, he was such an easygoing big boy. It was also her first time seeing it. Actually, the way back to the broken cauldron is the same as the way out. Blake looked at the wall in front of him. Sure enough, it was below the wall. He saw a trash can. Hannah took out a magic wand. From this trash can, count 3 pieces, then count 2 pieces horizontally. Hannah said. She knocked the piece with the magic wand. In the next second, the whole wall started to move. The bricks on the wall automatically drilled to the side. Soon, a door big enough for a person to pass through appeared. Thank you, Hannah. To show my gratitude, I'll treat you to dinner. No need. Ding. Extremely shy emotion detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a gold treasure chest. Quote. Blake was slightly stunned. It seemed that she got a treasure chest because of her shyness. And it was her first time. And wasn't it just a few words to him? She didn't have to be that shy, right? Seeing Hannah's uneasy expression, Blake did not insist. This little girl didn't seem to be very easy to tease. Then, I'll treat you to dinner next time. Hannah made a sound like a mosquito. Then she ran into the broken cauldron behind the wall. Blake really wanted to look in the mirror now. To see if he was a green-faced fanged beast. Otherwise, why would the girl be scared away when she saw him? Next, Blake rented a room in the broken cauldron bar. After eating something casually. Then, he went into his room. He put the box of books aside for the time being. The most important thing was still the exciting part of opening the treasure chests. Blake slightly counted the treasure chests in the system space. He was suddenly in a good mood. Because today was really a big harvest. The number of chests aside for the time being. The most important thing was that the quality of these chests was very high. There were 4 silver treasure chests. 5 gold treasure chests. 1 diamond treasure chest. Blake looked at these chests. Then, she sucked in a breath of cold air. Among these 5 gold treasure chests, Cassandra alone took up 3 of them. Blake smiled until his eyes narrowed. This little girl's drop rate was also very high. Old rules. System, open the treasure chests for me. Quote. Open from the low quality to the high quality. Ding. The system is opening the silver treasure chests for the host. Quote. Comma. The 4 silver treasure chests were opened quickly. Blake slightly counted. He actually opened 4 books that could be learned directly. They were Elementary Magic Spell Proficiency, Elementary Magic Staff Proficiency, Elementary Herbology Proficiency, Elementary Alchemy Proficiency. Blake happily accepted all of them. In these books, alchemy and herbology were what he was more eager to get now. As for Magic Staff Proficiency, it was better than nothing. After all, he didn't plan to learn Magic Staff Gun Ollivander's business. As for Magic Spell Proficiency, because he had already learned the best casting skills before. Therefore, the mastery of curses could only slightly increase the speed of his curses. But it was still an improvement. Then next, open the gold treasure chests. Ding. Opening the gold treasure chests for the host. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the best magic staff proficiency talent. Quote. Well, this is very Ollivander. Blake smiled and accepted the talent. System, can the remaining 4 gold treasure chests be opened in one go? Ding. Opening 4 gold treasure chests for the host. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the best herbology talent. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the best weather spell proficiency. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the best prophecy talent. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the best cooking proficiency. Quote. Hiss, so good. Blake looked at these rewards happily. But, prophecy talent. This Cassandra also has the prophecy talent. Otherwise, why would she give me this skill? Also, didn't they say that I also have Grindelwald's bloodline? Why didn't I feel that I had the prophecy talent before? Blake didn't think too much about the prophecy talent. After all, he couldn't know the answer now. Maybe he could ask Dumbledore later. Then, he looked at the rewards one by one. Overall, it was still very good. The herbalism talent and the druid template were very compatible. He could already imagine the scene of the plants he grew chasing the enemy all over the world. For the current Blake, the wand talent and the prophecy talent. He didn't need it for the time being. However, the weather incantation mastery and cooking mastery were very suitable for Blake. Because these two were skills. The kind that could be learned directly. Moreover, one of them could increase his attack means. The other was to comfort his own stomach. Not to mention the attack means. It could increase his strength. And the cooking skill. Previously, the cooking of the intermediate cooking skill was already very delicious. Then, the current top-grade cooking skill. Wouldn't the food he made be very fragrant? This wave was very comfortable. Blake had a hard time suppressing it. Right now, he wanted to run out and make supper. Because in the system space, there was still a diamond treasure chest that hadn't been opened. This was the highlight. The druid template that he opened from the diamond treasure chest previously. This made Blake extremely satisfied. Now, it was also a diamond treasure chest. What could he get from it? Blake's heart was filled with anticipation. System, open the diamond treasure chest. Ding. Opening the diamond treasure chest. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a custom wand set meal. Quote. Ah. What does this mean? Quote. Blake was slightly disappointed. He felt that this reward didn't seem to be as useful as the druid template. Ding. A custom wand set meal has been detected. Would the host like to use it? Quote. Yes, use it. Blake clicked on use without hesitation. He wanted to see what kind of customization this was. Ding. Customizing the wand for the host. Quote. Ding. The custom-made wand is a success. Quote. Ding. Please choose the appearance of the wand that you like. Quote. So the so-called customization is just a customization of appearance. If this wand can withstand my full power, then this reward is not bad. Although Ollivander had said that he wanted to tailor a wand for himself, he still had to make it. But, who knew if he would succeed? Blake thought of this. Without another word, he entered the customization interface. Blake suddenly found that his consciousness had arrived at a sealed space. In the middle of the space, there was a shadow of a magic wand. Currently, there are no images. Shua. In the next second, various parameters appeared in the space. For example, the size, shape, color, special effects, and template of the wand. Blake rubbed his chin. He was prepared to make a careful choice. But at this moment, ding. As long as the wand is still in the hands of the host. Quote. The host can customize his wand as many times as he wants. Ah. Then what was there to be conflicted about? In any case, he could always change it when he got tired of it. Then, Blake began to customize the system. Since he could change his appearance at any time. Blake did not intend to make the wand look too good. Because that would be too eye-catching. Thus, very quickly, a 15-inch long wand appeared in front of him. It was the same as his name. The entire wand was pure black. The body of the wand and the handle of the wand were pure black. Because it was the ultimate black. Instead, it exuded a unique charm. Blake looked at the wand with satisfaction. Then, without hesitation, he pressed confirm. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a custom-made magic wand. Quote. In the next moment, Blake's consciousness returned to the real world. Then, he saw the black wand floating in front of him. Phew. Blake took a deep breath. He was still somewhat nervous. After all, he had blown up many magic wands. What if this one could not withstand it? That would be a pity. After all, it was a custom-made appearance. But very quickly, he found that he had underestimated the quality of the system's products. Blake just gently held the wand. A word surged in his heart. Powerful. This was the first feeling Blake had when he held the wand. Incomparably powerful. This was the second feeling he had when he held the wand. His third feeling was that, connected by blood, this wand seemed to be a part of his body. An extension of his fingers. Swoosh. Blake waved the wand fiercely. Violent magic power suddenly surged into the wand. Condensed without releasing. Blake looked at the wand in surprise. It actually withstood Blake's violent magic power without any pressure. Moreover, this wand actually increased the magic power Blake poured into it by 2 times. What did this mean? This meant that Blake only needed to use this wand to fight. Then, he could release magic spells with twice the power. This wand is too powerful. I wonder how it compares to the old wand. This time, the system did not remain silent. Ding. The wand's material is unknown. The wand's core is unknown. It is 15 inches long and is extremely flexible. The quality is the same as the old wand. Quote. Hiss, as expected of the system's products. Blake played with the wand in his hand, unable to put it down. He suddenly remembered that Ollivander was making a custom-made magic wand for him. Blake glanced at the wand in his hand. I wonder if Mr. Ollivander's custom-made magic wand can be customized. Comma. Old Master. This is a photo of the young master. In a narrow stone room. The old house elf, Gucci. She handed a photo in her hand to Grindelwald. In the photo, Blake looked at the camera with a somewhat uneasy expression. This was a photo of the Muggle world. Therefore, the person in the photo would not move. Grindelwald took the photo. His finger lightly brushed across the photo. Blake's azure eyes. He was in a daze. After a while. How is he? The young master is very handsome. Very talented. Quote. After a while. Gucci, you go, take good care of him. That old fool has so many boring things to do. How will he have time to take care of this child? But, if Gucci leaves, what will happen to the old master? Don't worry about me. Gucci suggests that Gucci's son take care of the young master. Comma. The morning sun shone on Blake's face. Blake's eyebrows moved slightly. Then, he slowly opened his eyes. Crack, crack, crack. Blake straightened his back. He stretched his body vigorously. His bones began to crack. Last night, he fell asleep on the table. On the table. It was filled with all kinds of open books. After customizing the wand, it took him an entire night to do so. He read all the books that he brought back yesterday. Yes, with the help of his powerful academic genius talent and eidetic memory talent. His so-called reading. That was to say, he flipped through all the books 10 lines at a glance. Because the top-grade academic genius talent allowed him to quickly understand the contents of the books. And the eidetic memory talent allowed him to firmly remember all the knowledge in the books in his mind. He looked at the book on the table that had lost its meaning after just one flip. Blake scratched his head. I'm really diligent. He picked up his magic wand. He played with it fondly for a while. Then he put it into the system warehouse. At this stage, he couldn't take it out for the time being. When Blake decided to let Ollivander make the magic wand, he tried to make it the same as this one. Then he would be able to take it out in the open. Of course, if Ollivander didn't accept Blake's request for a custom appearance, then he would have to redefine the appearance of his magic wand. It would be good to change it to the same one that Ollivander made. Thinking of this, Blake opened the door and walked out. He was going to have breakfast first before deciding on today's itinerary. He came to the bar counter of the Broken Cauldron bar. He saw the crumpled bread in the plates of the other customers. And the dry steaks. He couldn't help but sigh. It was only cheap to eat here. Otherwise, with this food, it would be strange if someone ate here. Blake went directly to the owner of the Broken Cauldron bar, Tom. Boss, can I borrow your kitchen? Yes, you can use it as you wish. However, you have to pay for the ingredients. Of course, unless you bring your own ingredients. Blake heard this and casually threw out a gold coin. Tom took the gold coin nimbly. Then, He pulled out a notebook and wrote down Blake's name. I'll deduct the ingredients you use here, he added. Got it, Blake said. Then he ran into the kitchen. The products of the system were all exquisite. Back then, the intermediate level of cooking proficiency had already made Blake's cooking skills perfect. Let alone now. Not long after, the aroma of frying steak came from the kitchen. It attracted the other customers to look inside. Although frying steak was fragrant. But now, wasn't it a little too fragrant? Boss. Are you frying steak behind? Quote. I want one. A customer shouted to order. Tom was writing in the book. After Blake's name, write down the cost of the ingredients used to fry the steak. Hearing that, he casually replied, that's the steak that the customer is frying himself. If you're asking me to order, I won't be able to. Tom had just finished his words. Blake carried 2 steaks. She walked out from behind the kitchen. When Tom saw this, he opened the book again. He added a line behind Blake's name. Blake ignored the gazes of the people around him. He placed the plate on the table and started to eat. As expected of the system. This supreme-grade cooking proficiency was simply ridiculous. With just one bite, Blake almost cried from the fragrance. At this moment, a sleepy little girl came down from upstairs. Good morning, Hannah. Blake waved at Hannah. Good morning. Hannah was finally not that shy today. I'll treat you to breakfast. As a thank you gift for helping me yesterday. Blake said as he pushed the extra steak to the table. Tom stared at Blake for a moment. Good boy, I was wondering why you fried 2 servings. Hannah didn't really want to go there. But, when Blake pushed the steak out. That aroma. The customer just now saw Blake's actions. She was about to drool. Isn't this steak a little too fragrant? Hannah originally wanted to refuse. But she didn't know why. When she came back to her senses, she was already sitting next to Blake. When she was a little surprised by her actions, she found that she had already cut a small piece of steak. Didn't I want to refuse? Why? When Hannah opened her mouth to say something, she had already stabbed a small piece of steak with her fork and was about to put it into her mouth. Hannah, who was struggling with her own rationality. In the end, she lost to her instincts. Although Hannah wanted to refuse in her heart, her body was very honest. It was all because this steak was too fragrant. In the end, she gave up resisting. She closed her eyes and put the beef on the fork into her mouth. It's delicious. It was tender and juicy, and the texture was top-notch. Originally, Hannah had always thought that her cooking skills were very good. But now, boohoo, what if I can't eat such delicious food in the future? Ding. Detected the emotion of joy. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 1 silver treasure chest. Quote. Because of the food, Hannah was actually much more talkative. Especially when she asked Blake for advice on cooking techniques. After breakfast, Blake, who was feeling refreshed, came to Diagon Alley again. Yesterday, because Dumbledore was by his side. So there were still many places he had not been to. He took advantage of the fact that there was not enough time to go to Ollivander's shop. Therefore, he went straight to the herb shop. The shop that sold herbs also sold seeds. In fact, he had been here yesterday. It was just that Dumbledore was there yesterday. So some seeds were not easy to buy. But today, Blake soon arrived at the entrance of the herb shop. But, it seemed that enemies were bound to meet on a narrow road. He immediately saw a green figure. Cassandra was squatting at the entrance of the herb shop, picking out seeds. The corners of Blake's mouth curled up slightly. Oh, someone was going to give him a treasure chest again. At the thought of this, Blake walked over directly. Sure enough, he deliberately increased the sound of his footsteps. Soon, he attracted Cassandra's attention. Blake seemed to have no intention of talking to Cassandra. Instead, he was prepared to walk past her. But, wait. Cassandra shouted at Blake. A hint of a smile flashed across the corners of Blake's mouth. I knew you were going to stop me. As far as Blake knew, Cassandra should be very knowledgeable in herbology. This was also the reason why Blake was able to open a herb-type skill in her chest last night. She saw him coming to the herb shop to buy things. According to her personality, she would definitely take the opportunity to get back at him. So Blake guessed that she would call out to him. My name is Cassandra Worley. Actually, we met in the wand shop yesterday. Cassandra said slightly arrogantly. Oh, so it's you. Hello, Miss Worley. My name is Blake. Blake Green. Quote. Blake answered politely. Then, he pretended to look at Cassandra. Then he said calmly. Well, Miss Worley, is your neck, miss? Why do you keep looking up? Why don't you find a doctor? Look, I can see your nostrils. This is too unladylike. Cassandra's body stiffened. You. She almost lost her cool because of Blake. Cassandra, who had always thought of herself as a lady. How could she stand being called unladylike? Ding. Anger detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the silver treasure chest. Quote. Blake chuckled to himself. Hee hee, who asked you to glare at me with your nostrils? I'll anger you to death. Blake wasn't worried at all that the little girl would turn around and leave. After all, she didn't want to get back at him for yesterday. How could she sleep at night? Sure enough, Blake found that she quietly took several deep breaths. He skipped the topic of being unladylike. He asked again, are you here to buy herb seeds too? Oh, of course, I know a little about herbology. Quote. So, I'm going to buy some seeds to plant. It was as if he didn't feel Cassandra's hostility at all. Blake replied calmly. Blake snickered in his heart. This little girl really couldn't keep her cool. She was actually so anxious to get back at him. Is that so? Then, do you know what kind of seed this is? Quote. Cassandra casually pointed at the seed she was picking just now and asked. Blake glanced at it indifferently. This is the seed of blackroot grass. Miss Worley. Quote. Blackroot grass is a very powerful plant. After people eat it, it can offset part of the damage of magic. Its roots are pure black, but its flowers are pure white. It's very easy to recognize. Cassandra pursed her lips. Did I ask you? You just blabbered so much on your own. Although you're right. However, just as Cassandra was about to speak, Blake spoke again. This time, his tone was still calm. Miss Worley is really studious. Even when you're shopping outside, you're still seizing the opportunity to learn. Since you don't understand, you asked me. I don't think I can hide it. So I unconsciously said a little more. I hope you don't mind. Oh, of course, if there's still something you don't understand, you can continue to ask me. I'll tell you everything I know. Cassandra listened to Blake's words. She was stunned. What did he mean? What did he mean by I didn't understand, so I asked him? Wasn't I testing him? How did it become me asking him for advice? This. Who doesn't know about blackroot grass? This young lady's family is in the herbal medicine business. My knowledge of herbal medicine. Do I have to ask you? The anger that Cassandra had suppressed with great difficulty just now surged again. Ding. Detected anger. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest. Quote. Comma. You. Cassandra's angry words had yet to come out. She was interrupted by Blake again. Many people think that the method of growing this blackroot grass is very simple. You just have to stick the roots into the mud. Cassandra was furious. Who didn't know? However, I want to say that this method is wrong. Blake continued. Although I can still grow them this way. However, it is very difficult for the blackroot grass to grow tall enough. It's only 15 inches tall at most. But if you plant it the way I do, Li Yao said. Even 30 inches is not a problem. Because of this, the medicinal properties will increase by more than 2 times. This new method is called grafting. I found that the blackroot grass and the guardian tree are very similar. As long as Cassandra was angry at first. She wanted to interrupt Blake. However, Blake explained the new method of grafting blackroot grass. He even explained the principle in a very organized manner. Cassandra was speechless. Because the more she listened, the more she felt that this method was feasible. She waited for Blake to finish his sentence. She had the urge to run home and do the experiment immediately. After Blake finished speaking, Cassandra looked at Blake in disbelief. She originally wanted to find Blake to get back at him. After all, herbology was indeed her strength. But now, the herbology knowledge that Blake displayed. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was far above her. Moreover, the most important thing was his innovative planting methods. She absolutely couldn't think of them now. Cassandra, who had always been arrogant, was once again dealt a blow. Even her herbology, which she was good at, couldn't compare to him. Ding. Detected depressed emotions. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest. Quote. Blake looked at the depressed Cassandra. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He learned all his herbology knowledge last night. It was Cassandra's own treasure chest that gave it to him. Even though the system only gave him a beginner herbology proficiency. His beginner herbology proficiency had already far surpassed Cassandra's. Moreover, he even read last night. Combining his top-notch herbology talent and his top student talent, Blake quickly came up with many creative ideas on herbology. This grafting technique was one of them. This technique, even if Cassandra's parents came after seeing it, they had to study it seriously. Not to mention Cassandra, who had only learned a little. Wasn't it easy to use it to pinch the young Cassandra? It was a pity that Cassandra didn't seem to be very good today. The treasure chests that dropped were all silver. However, Blake didn't take it to heart. It was good enough to have one. Miss Worley. Blake called out softly. But Cassandra seemed to have lost her soul. There was no response. It seemed that Blake had given her quite a big blow. Well, this didn't drop a gold treasure chest. System, I suspect that you took a commission. Blake didn't talk to Cassandra again. Instead, he walked directly into the herb shop. The owner of the herb shop was a middle-aged witch who was a little slovenly. But she grew and studied herbs. It was also difficult to keep the appearance clean and tidy. Dear, what do you need? She smiled at Blake. She thought that Blake was a freshman who came to buy materials for the potion class. Blake asked politely, well, boss, do you sell seeds here? Of course. Dear, in addition to herbs, we also sell seeds of herbs. Quote. The female owner said kindly. Ah, that's great. Blake said excitedly. Then, dear, what kind of seeds do you need? Our shop has all kinds of seeds. Quote. Well, let me see, I want to buy mandrake, poisonous tentacles, biting kale. After hearing the names of the seeds that Blake said, the female owner's kind smile disappeared. She pointed to the door. She said softly, get out. Obviously, Blake misjudged the situation. The seeds of these dangerous plants. No one dared to sell them to a child who hadn't even grown hair yet. Blake scratched his head and walked out of the herb shop. Oh, what should I do? Why don't I try the owl, online shopping? Outside the door, Cassandra had already recovered. But when she looked at Blake, there was only hostility in her eyes. There was also a hint of jealousy. Blake had encountered in the shop just now. She naturally saw it too. What do you want those seeds for? Blake shrugged. Of course, to plant them. Don't you know that those plants are dangerous? What are you talking about? Plant not ferocious and dangerous. What's so bad about that? Quote. Cassandra was speechless after hearing Blake's answer. She looked at Blake with some jealousy. Then she gritted her teeth. She said, actually, I have a way to get those seeds. What way? Blake asked excitedly. Overturn alley. Hiss, yes. Blake slapped his thigh. If a decent person didn't sell them, then he would buy them from an indecent person. As for saying that Overturn alley was dangerous, Blake chuckled. Did you see my 15-inch big wand? I'll smash your skull. Blake politely thanked Cassandra. Then, he said goodbye and left. He knew where Tumble Alley was. Yesterday, when he passed by the intersection of the street, Dumbledore had once told him. He went in from that excuse. It was Tumble Alley. He told him not to go there. There were a lot of bad people there. It was very dangerous. Then, Blake knew where Tumble Alley was. Of course, Dumbledore didn't know that this little thing was so stubborn. He knew the danger, but he still went in. She looked at Blake's back as he left. A complicated expression flashed across Cassandra's face. Although Blake wasn't afraid of the danger in Tumble Alley, he didn't want to be surrounded as soon as he entered. That would be very troublesome. So, Blake took out a coat. Then, he took out his magic wand and turned it into a cloak with a face scarf. Before entering Tumble Alley, he carefully inspected his attire again. After finding that there was no problem, then, he strode into the notorious Tumble Alley. Tumble Alley had always been the kind of place that didn't care about anything. There were people hiding inside. Not many of them were clean. The people from the Ministry of Magic couldn't do anything about this place. Blake was wrapped in a cloak. Although he was a little short. But no one noticed him. After all, his entire body was wrapped tightly. It might be very strange outside. But in Tumble Alley, it was a very normal outfit. After Blake came in, then, he began to size up this notorious overturn alley. Tumble Alley was compared to Diagon Alley outside. The surrounding shops and the floor on the ground. They all looked much more shabby. And the people inside. Everyone was in a hurry. Even the shop owners who sat at the door. Every single one of them looked hideous as well. They were the kind of people who almost had the word, bad, carved on their forehead. As for the things bought in the shop next to them, that was even more restricted. All kinds of black magic props. There were also all kinds of disgusting materials of unknown uses. It could be said to be a dazzling lineup. However, these were things that would make ordinary children scream in fear. Blake, on the other hand, was watching with great interest. In fact, he felt that Tumbling Alley was a little smelly. The items sold were one level above the limit. There was nothing to be afraid of. He came in here. Wasn't it just to buy those strange things? Blake wasn't in a hurry to find the seeds. Instead, he planned to finish his stroll around Overturn Alley first. Perhaps other than the seed. Are there any other interesting things? Not long after Blake entered Knockback Alley. He saw something that he was interested in. It was a smelly shop. Blake judged from the smell of blood and the bloodstains on the ground. This was a meat shop. As for what meat to sell, naturally, it was the meat of those mystical animals that were hunted by the restriction. And what Blake was interested in. It was being placed in front of the shop. It was a small cage. A small black creature was cowering in the corner of the cage, shivering. Blake just glanced at the flat mouth. He recognized it immediately. This was a sniff. Blake had originally wanted to buy a sniffer dog, but now, he had decided to buy one. After all, this little thing was not only very cute. Furthermore, his ability to attract aggro was amazing. It was the capable general that Blake needed. It was a pity. The mystical animal pet shop in Diagon Alley. There was no sniff for sale. But now, Blake decided to buy this sniff. On the one hand, he needed a sniff. On the other hand, if he didn't buy this sniff might be slaughtered and eaten. You want to buy this sniff? Suddenly, a voice came from the entrance of the shop. Blake looked up. Then he saw a shirtless man. A fat man wearing a pair of suspenders. Yes, I want to buy this sniff. Blake nodded. Okay, as long as you can afford it. The fat man laughed. Then, how much? 1,000 gold garin. The fat man said with an evil smile. Blake sighed. He met with a robber. Then I'm sorry, I won't buy it. Blake said with a smile. Hee, now, you can't not buy it. The big fatty chuckled. Then, 7 or 8 people suddenly surrounded him on the street. Don't think that I don't know you're a brat just because you're wrapped up tightly. Hey, what do you want? Blake asked helplessly. I haven't eaten it in a long time, catch him. There are always some brats who don't know their place and want to come to Flip Alley to see the world. Blake saw that he had been exposed. He took off his cloak. I just said, I won't buy this sniff. It's because. Blake took out his big wand. I'm going to rob you directly. Listen, take out all the valuable and interesting things you have on you. The fat man and the 7 or 8 people were stunned for a moment. Then they laughed loudly. Hey, brat, you really don't know what's good for you. Quote. Everyone surrounded him. Blake was not afraid. He raised his big wand. Stop. However, just as Blake was about to act cool, someone interrupted him. Who's the busybody now? The fat man looked at the entrance of the alley. Because Blake didn't go too far. He found Sniff. So he was not far from the entrance of the alley connected to Diagon Alley. Blake also looked at the entrance of the alley. It was a 13 or 14-year-old girl. A beautiful girl with curly hair. She was looking over here nervously. Stop. Stop. Let go of that boy. Quote. She raised her wand at the fat man. Blake, who was surrounded, looked at this beautiful girl in surprise. He couldn't help but scratch his head. Because he really didn't know this girl. Okay, I'll let him go. After all, I don't want to get into trouble. The fat man smiled, then waved his hand to signal those people to make way. Come, take this kid away before I change my mind. What are you waiting for? Quote. The fat man urged. When the girl heard the urging, she actually ran over. Blake put his hand on his forehead. Although this girl was very, but, really, so pure. You actually believe the words of these fellows. Why don't you tell me too? By the time she arrived in front of Blake. Then, he saw Blake's helpless expression. Sure enough, after she walked in, someone had purposely blocked the entrance to the alley. It blocked the view of the outside world. To prevent anyone to of. And those 7 or teat. When he saw her walk in, he saw her walk in. Then, they surrounded him again. You guys didn't keep your word. The girl looked angrily at the people surrounding her. No matter how pure she was, she knew that she had been deceived. Ahem, wait a minute. Blake patted her shoulder. Ah, but wait a minute, I have to finish something first. What is it? Nothing, I have to rob first. Under the dumbfounded gaze of the little missy, Blake raised his wand again. I just said it was a robbery. Are you guys deaf? Give me all the money and fun things. Little brat. The fat man rushed over. He wanted to grab Blake. He would beat him up first. Then he would think about whether to sell him to others or directly slaughter him for meat. As for the little girl, he. As for the magic wand in Blake's hand. He. The magic wand in the hand of an 11-year-old child. It was not even as threatening as a toothpick. A toothpick pricking someone was even more painful. Crack. Boom. Quote. Blake decisively activated the weather spell. In the next second, the lightning that filled the sky struck down fiercely. The huge lightning was like a wild snake dancing wildly. It was directly flattened on the street. No matter who it was. As long as they surrounded Blake and the girl. They were directly charred on the outside and tender on the inside. Even if there were some desperados. They had rich combat experience. They released the armor spell in time. But, Blake was a top-grade expert in the weather spell. It was almost equivalent to the maximum level of the weather spell. In addition to the bonus of many talents. In addition, the magic wand in his hand had increased the power of the spell by 2 times. How could the armor spell that was cast in a hurry be blocked? So, except for the curly-haired girl standing next to Blake who was still standing. The rest of the people were lying on the ground with their bodies charred black and twitching. As for the black wizards who had been watching the show in the distance, they all immediately turned back at attention. Then, they slipped away as if nothing had happened. Although the curly-haired girl was unscathed. But among her beautiful curly hair, there were still many tiny strands of hair. Because of the powerful lightning just now, they stood upright. Cough cough, when robbing, it's normal for the other party to resist. You just need to beat him up. However, it's best not to kill him. Otherwise, when the time comes, you'll have to find valuable things yourself. So, you have to keep him alive. As long as you interrogate him, you can directly succeed in robbing him. Of course, some people will still be unconvinced. That doesn't matter. You just need to beat him up again. Blake kept talking as he spoke. While using one hand, he easily picked up the fat man. Then, he threw him fiercely in the middle of the street. The curly-haired girl had been in a state of shock since just now. When she saw this scene, she was even more shocked and speechless. A boy who was obviously a few years younger than her. He raised his magic wand and performed a lightning version of the wild snake dance. He knocked down all the black wizards on the street. Did I wake up too fiercely today? Or was I still dreaming? An 11-year-old sorcerer defeated a whole bunch of dark sorcerers in one move. How could I have such a dream? And, he was still nagging. On the other hand, he was carrying a fat man who weighed more than 100 kilograms. He lifted him with one hand. Then, he threw it in the middle of the street. Yes, with one hand. It was only. Why couldn't he? Gandalf template. The power of a close combat mage. How could it be such an inconvenience? I'm definitely not awake yet. Then she began to pinch her arm. Ouch, it hurts. What's wrong? Are you hurt? I clearly had it under control. Quote. Blake looked at the curly-haired girl in confusion. A controlled weather spell. It shouldn't hurt this little sister. The curly-haired girl pinched herself too hard. She was in so much pain that tears welled up in her eyes. She blinked her big eyes and looked at Blake. I'm not dreaming. Ding. Extremely shocked emotion detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a gold treasure chest. Quote. Comma. Dumbledore returned to the principal's office with a tired face. He had been traveling around for the past few days. His journey could be said to have spanned half of the globe. It could be said that he was very tired. Even though his body was still very healthy. However, he was already very old. This kind of hard work was a bit unbearable. He planned to have a good rest. Then he would go to Diagon Alley to see Blake. Thinking about Blake, Dumbledore's heart was filled with warmth. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Come in, Dumbledore said tiredly. Professor McGonagall walked in quickly. Albus, you're finally back. Okay, after I rest, I'll immediately start working at the school. Dumbledore smiled bitterly. Sigh, I'm not here because work is rushing you, Albus. I just want to say that you're not young anymore. Let Foggy deal with the matters of the Ministry of Magic himself. Quote. Thank you for your advice, Minerva. I should really consider your suggestion. Quote. Professor McGonagall was slightly stunned when she heard this. It was not like she had not suggested the same thing before. But Dumbledore had always just thanked her for her concern. Then he still worked for the Ministry of Magic. What was wrong with him today? He actually said that he would consider it. Albus, the boy you mentioned last time. She took out a letter. It was the admission letter she was going to write to Blake. Should I write Blake Grindelwald? Write Blake Grindelwald. That last name will bring him trouble. Quote. Okay. She put away the envelope and continued to look at Dumbledore. After Dumbledore said that he would come back, she would explain the situation to him. Dumbledore understood what she meant. Please sit down. Tea or pumpkin juice? A cup of tea will be fine, thank you. Professor McGonagall pulled a chair over and sat across from Dumbledore. Dumbledore raps the table. Then, a pot of tea and 2 teacups suddenly appeared on the table. This matter, I can tell you. Because you saw that surname. But, I beg you to keep this a secret. This is also for the sake of that child. After all, what Grindelwald did had nothing to do with him. Professor McGonagall nodded. She also knew what this surname represented. Naturally, he wouldn't tell anyone about it. However, that was Grindelwald. In the days when Dumbledore was not back, she lived in fear every day. He was afraid that the peaceful days would never return. Don't worry, that person is still obediently staying in Numungard. Dumbledore saw Professor McGonagall's uneasiness. This matter is only a historical issue left behind by Grindelwald. Okay, I'm relieved to hear that. Professor McGonagall breathed a sigh of relief. Then, that child, who is Grindelwald? Professor McGonagall took a sip of tea as she spoke. In fact, it's not just who is Grindelwald, it's who is between him and me. What? Professor McGonagall frowned. She didn't quite understand what Dumbledore meant. In fact, strictly speaking, Dumbledore's lips trembled twice. In the end, he said it out loud. Blake, that boy is my son. PFF'd. Professor McGonagall spat out the tea in her mouth. She looked at Dumbledore in shock. Her pupils were shaking. In other words, strictly speaking, Blake is your and Grindelwald's son. Just now, Dumbledore had told Professor McGonagall about what had happened in the past few days. Because Professor McGonagall saw the name. Therefore, it was impossible for Dumbledore to hide it from her. However, Professor McGonagall was indeed a trustworthy person. You've already adopted the child. No, you should have brought him back to the Dumbledore family, right? Yes, the day before yesterday, I took him to Diagon Alley to buy school supplies. Professor McGonagall smiled. Congratulations, Albus. Professor McGonagall was congratulating him for finding a relative. At least, even if he was old, there was still someone who could take care of him. Instead of waiting for death alone at St. Mungo. Thank you. Minerva ideographic period. If that's the case, Albus ideographic period. Shouldn't you change his surname back to Dumbledore? Quote. Since that child has returned to the Dumbledore family. Then, Dumbledore waved his hand. Everyone knows that I've never married or had any children in my life. So, if you change his surname back to Dumbledore, it will attract unnecessary criticism for this child. I'm already old, so it doesn't matter. I don't care if people criticize my personal morals. But what about Blake? I don't want him to grow up in an environment where people are talking about him. Professor McGonagall sighed. All right, then I'll treat this child as your adopted child. You're old. You chose to adopt a child. No one will say anything. Okay, I have to go to work. You don't have to help. Take some time. Spend some time with that child. In that case, no wonder that child is so talented in transformation. I'm already looking forward to school. Cassandra, what's wrong? You've been restless all morning. Quote. Mrs. Worley said worriedly. No, nothing. I'll go out for a walk again. Quote. Cassandra. But Cassandra had already run out. She had followed her mother to Diagon Alley today. While his mother was busy, she decided to take a look at the herbal medicine shop. Then, he met Blake. After that, she focused on the subject she was best at. Once again, he was dealt a heavy blow by Blake. A flame of jealousy rose in her heart. Then, the demon in her heart quietly came out. Deceive that boy. Let that boy go to Tumble Alley. Overturn Alley was so dangerous. As long as he went in, he definitely wouldn't be able to come out. As long as that was the case. Then Cassandra. You will once again become the genius that everyone talks about. You will become the center of attention again. However, every time she thought of Blake's excited expression when he left. She was so innocent. He looked like someone who was easily fooled. Cassandra felt extremely conflicted. He might be killed by me. But, I don't think anyone would be so stupid as to go to Diagon Alley, right? But, he looks like he really wants to go. No, it has nothing to do with me, even if he died in Overturn Alley. No one will know that I was the one who sent him to Tumble Alley. But I know that I was the one who tricked him into Tumble Alley. Cassandra's heart was conflicted. Her conscience and the devil were constantly fighting. In the end, on the surface, I said that he was worthy of being my opponent. Then, I secretly wanted to kill him. How could I be so despicable? Cassandra walked blindly in Diagon Alley. Suddenly, she saw a familiar figure. Professor Dumbledore. Cassandra ran over. Miss Worley. Quote. What's the matter? Dumbledore asked with a smile. Obviously, he was in a good mood today. Professor, Blake entered Overturn Alley. What? Go. Quote. Dumbledore turned around and left. Cassandra noticed that he had already pulled out his magic wand. His hand that was holding the wand was turning white. In Overturn Alley. My name is Blake. Blake Green. Quote. Senior, what's your name? Blake sat leisurely on a sofa. He was holding a sniff in his arms. Next to him, a fat man with a swollen face was eagerly pouring tea for Blake. There were also two dark wizards massaging Blake's legs. My name is Penelope. Penelope Cleavage. Quote. You can call me Penelope. Penelope looked at Blake speechlessly. This group of dark wizards. Just now, they were so fierce. They were shouting to kill. But now, they were like grandchildren. They were serving an 11-year-old little wizard. This scene was funny no matter how she looked at it. But, an 11-year-old little wizard. He had single-handedly subdued this group of dark magi. Wasn't that even more ridiculous? Senior Penelope, sit down too. The sofa under Blake was very big. It was still too big for him to sit alone. So he sat next to her. Then he patted the empty seat next to him and called Penelope. Speaking of which, I still have a lot of things to ask you about Hogwarts. Penelope was about to speak. Blake. A serious voice came from the alley. Plop. Blake was so scared that he almost fell off the sofa. Professor Dumbledore. Penelope looked at Dumbledore in surprise as he walked quickly into Overturn Alley. Behind him. Followed by a little girl in a green dress. She followed closely behind Dumbledore. There was also a hint of anxiety on her face. But she couldn't hide her curiosity as she looked at the legendary Overturn Alley. Because she had been following behind Dumbledore. So she didn't see Blake. Only then did she poke her head out from behind Dumbledore to look. Then, she saw a comical scene. Blake was sitting in the middle of Overturn Alley like a boss. A group of ferocious guys were waiting on him like his grandchildren. He is completely fine. These people are still serving him. How did he do it? Cassandra could not hide the shock in her heart. However, I knew this guy wouldn't die so easily. Cassandra's heart immediately relaxed. He even felt a little happy for Blake's safety. Blake, aren't you going to explain? Dumbledore put away his wand. He said with a smile. Blake, who was caught red-handed, had no time to think about what was going on in his head. He received a silver treasure chest notification. I trusted you so much, but you actually told on me. It wasn't as if Blake hadn't thought that this young miss had tricked him into Tumble Alley to harm him. However, he did not expect to turn around and go to GOMI. Otherwise, he wouldn't have waited in Overturn Alley so casually. Wait for the dark sorcerers to buy the seeds for him. Next to them. When the dark wizards saw Dumbledore, they were shocked. Everyone was scared silly. What was the relationship between this little wizard and Dumbledore? Were they relatives? Otherwise, why would Dumbledore care so much about him? When he saw Dumbledore rush in, he even pulled out his wand. That big fatty was so scared that he almost lost 5 pounds. Fortunately, he didn't do anything to this little ancestor. Or else, if you have such a big backer, you should have said so earlier. I would have saved myself from being beaten up. Cassandra heard Blake say that she was a snitch. She was displeased. HMPH. I'm just afraid that you'll die in Overturn Alley. Quote. Alright, Blake, Miss Warren is also worried about your safety. I'm not worried about him, Cassandra muttered. Dumbledore continued, also, didn't I say before? Don't come to Overturn Alley. Dumbledore's tone was very calm. However, Blake felt a strong sense of oppression. I was wrong. Blake immediately lowered his head. He admitted his mistake first. But after that, he still dared to. Dumbledore did not know that Blake had learned the beginner's brain seal spell in the newbie gift pack. Hence, after using mind capture to probe Blake's sincere apology, he did not intend to pursue the matter. After all, this kid was fine, wasn't he? Dumbledore looked at Penelope. Then, Miss Cleavage. Why did you come here? Quote. It's like this, Penelope glanced at Blake. Then, she began to explain the reason. Actually, she was quite wronged. She only wanted to save the boy. She did not expect to be deceived first. She was a little embarrassed to say it out loud. However, it did not matter if she told the truth. The Dark Warlock's legs turned to jelly. It's over. Not only did he want to capture the child that Dumbledore cared about, he wanted to capture and sell him or eat him. He even wanted to kidnap his student in broad daylight. The fat man looked up at the sky. Sigh, life was really up. At this moment, he did not have any thoughts of resisting. Resist. This old and this young. Who could he beat? If he had been more serious when learning Phantom Transfiguration, he might have had a chance to escape. But now, he could not beat them, and he could not escape either. Forget it, he resigned himself to fate. Anyway, he was full of evil in his life. He was still lamenting. Then, he saw Dumbledore's gaze. Then, he felt his blood turn cold. That gaze, it was too terrifying. Was Dumbledore not a good person? Dumbledore's stare almost made the fatty wet his pants. Dumbledore turned his eyes to Penelope. He said with a smile. Your bravery makes me proud. Miss Cleavage. Quote. But next time, before you act bravely, you must remember to protect yourself first. The last sentence. Dumbledore spoke very seriously. If he couldn't even guarantee his own safety, how could he protect others then? If he blindly acted recklessly, that was a chance for both sides to be saved. It would also be wasted by recklessness. Yes, I will remember. Penelope hung her head in shame. As a Ravenclaw. Yet, he was so easily deceived. Now that he thought about it. If she had told Blake to come out on his own. Or, he could ask Auror for help. They could avoid putting themselves in danger. Alright, you're just young and haven't seen the dark side. Then, you guys go ahead and wait for me at the Broken Cauldron bar. Dumbledore finally let Blake and the others leave Tumble Alley. As for Dumbledore, he stayed in Tumble Alley. He said that he had to deal with the matters here. He would look for them again. When Blake left Tumble Alley, he happened to see the fatty's desperate eyes. He walked out of Tumble Alley. Penelope heaved a huge sigh of relief. She swore that she would never come to Tumble Alley again. Today, she almost. Cassandra glanced at Blake with a complicated expression. Then, she turned around and left. I'll go back first. You're leaving. Don't you want to have a meal together? Quote. I'm not free. Cassandra left after she finished speaking. Blake was a little puzzled. She was so angry at Tumble Alley just now. She seemed to be very angry too. But why didn't the system give him a treasure chest? Was there an upper limit? That shouldn't be. How much was that? Besides, even if there was an upper limit, the system should have given him a notification. Penelope returned sniff to Blake. Then she said, "It's time for me to go. Aren't you coming to eat with me? Anyway, I'm very grateful for your help today." Penelope shook her head. "I've been out for so long. My family will be worried." Blake had no choice but to return to the broken cauldron by himself. He put Sniff back in the room first. He also told it not to run around. Sniff usually didn't listen to people. It weighed 10 pounds and was 9 pounds rebellious. But Blake was an archdruid. Then, while Blake was waiting, he went to the kitchen of the broken cauldron to prepare a sumptuous lunch. Dumbledore soon arrived at the broken cauldron. Then, he was shocked by Blake's cooking skills. This made Blake earn another silver treasure chest. After the meal, what happened to those dark wizards? Blake asked curiously. I handed them over to Auror. I'll leave the rest to the Ministry of Magic. Dumbledore replied. I see. If nothing unexpected happened, those guys might be squatting in Azkaban for a long time. Blake was actually a little regretful. Dumbledore came too early. Those guys didn't have time to buy him seeds. So, Blake went to Tumble Alley. In the end, he didn't achieve his goal. Dumbledore didn't stay for long. He left Diagon Alley again. He couldn't stay with Blake all day. After Blake sent Dumbledore away, he was going to go back to his room to take a nap. In the afternoon, he would go to Ollivander's wand shop to measure the data. However, when he had just returned to his room, then, he realized that something was wrong. Clean. Too clean. Just now, when he sent Sniff back, the books that he had finished reading were scattered all over the room. But now, the originally messy bed had been folded neatly. The scattered books were also put away in their proper categories. Even the old floorboards in the room were dragged until they reflected light. Something was very wrong. Don't tell Tom the boss did it. How could that guy be so diligent? Why was the floor so dirty? Creak, creak, creak. On the table, Sniff suddenly cried out. Then, he gestured at Blake for a while. These messages were incomprehensible to others. Blake, however, heard it clearly. He pulled out his wand. He looked at a corner of the room. Come out. Whose house elf are you? I'll count to 3. 3. Bang. Little Master. Beck is out. Quote. A scrawny house elf suddenly appeared in front of Blake. He looked at Blake with trepidation. Little Master. Blake sat down on the bed. Whose house elf are you? Beck. Beck is a house elf of the Grindelwald family. Whose family? This house elf was actually from the Grindelwald family. Blake touched his chin. What did this mean? This meant that Grindelwald had already noticed him. Beck has been a house elf of the Grindelwald family for generations. Beck's father, Gucci, is taking care of the old master in Numungard. But Beck's father, Gucci, recommended Beck to the old master. There was a hint of excitement on Beck's face. The old master agreed. So Beck will be responsible for taking care of the master's food, clothing, and shelter in the future. Quote. Oh, I see, Blake scratched his head. He decided to tell Dumbledore first. Next, it would be between the two of them. Blake didn't care. Well, it seems that I have to buy an owl. Without an owl, it would be inconvenient for him to send a letter to Dumbledore. Blake stood up. Beck, let's go. Go shopping with me. Quote. Yes. Since Grindelwald had sent this house elf over, he decided to give it a try. It would be a waste not to take it. Moreover, Blake was different from Hermione. He didn't care about the miserable status of the house elf. He wasn't interested in overthrowing this system. That was the most he could do. He was only a little better to his house elf. Blake let Sniff stay in the room. Then, he took the house elf to the streets. Blake didn't stop walking. He went straight to the owl shop. After entering the shop assistant enthusiastically went forward to introduce all kinds of owls to Blake. After all, the family that could have a house elf in the house. They were all ancient wizard families. They were all big customers who didn't lack money. Blake listened around. None of them caught his eye. Suddenly, he saw an owl squatting in a corner. His eyes lit up. I want that one. There was no other reason, because that owl was too big. It was 70 to 80 centimeters tall when it squatted there. Blake's principle. Plants had to be fierce and dangerous. The same went for magical animals. The fiercer and bigger, the better. Of course, if they weren't cruel enough. Then it had to be useful. Just like sniffing. So this owl was really to his liking. But, the shop assistant looked troubled. What's wrong? I can afford it. Quote. Blake asked in confusion. No, I just want to say that this eagle owl hasn't been fully trained yet. And a lot of wildness. It has been here for many days. It's not like no customers have taken a fancy to it. Quote. But it just doesn't want to go with me. You still want to attack people when you're angry. Blake looked at the eagle owl with a smile. The more he looked at it, the more he liked it. Gu. Eagle owl turned around and glanced at Blake. Then he turned his head to the other side. Ha, that's quite a character. It was Blake's first time seeing it. A mystical creature that was unaffected by his aura as an archdruid. Look, the clerk smiled apologetically. Why don't you buy a snowy owl? It's reliable and beautiful. No, I want this one. But, how about this, if I can make it follow me, you can give me a 10% discount. Blake said with a smile. Sigh, the clerk tried to persuade him but to no avail. He said helplessly, this eagle owl is really difficult to deal with. How about this, it can't be sold even if it squats here. If you really have a way to make it follow you, then I'll give it to you. You're the one who said it. Okay. The clerk nodded. This owl had a huge appetite. It couldn't be sold. The shop had long wanted to get rid of it. After Blake and the clerk discussed it, they came in front of the eagle owl. They only said one sentence. Do you want to come home with me and eat meat for every meal? Or do you want to stay here and eat owl biscuits every day? The eagle owl turned its head with a swoosh. Blake smiled and said, let's go. Come home with me. Quote. He stretched out his right arm. The shop assistant and some customers who were watching the show sighed secretly. This boy seemed to be quite rich. But he wasn't very smart. You said a few words and the owl left with you. Even if it left with you. Why don't you look at your skinny arms and legs? You can hold this giant eagle owl with one hand. I'll eat this feed bag on the spot. Just when the shop assistant and the customers were having such thoughts, the shop assistant and the onlookers all had the same thought. Flap, flap, flap. The eagle owl really flew over. Then it landed steadily on Blake's arm. The shop assistant. The onlooking customers. The shop assistant looked at the iron feed bag with a toothache. Blake blinked at the stunned shop assistant. Just like that, he left Ira's owl shop with the owl. Who is that boy? He's so strong. Yeah, but why did he say a few words? That eagle owl left with him. Quote. Yeah, it looks like the owl can understand what he's saying. Everyone in the shop was shocked. Unfortunately, the shop assistant and customers didn't give Blake any treasure chest. Blake didn't ask for a cage. How could you keep such a big bird in a cage? It would be better to let it be comfortable outside. Let's do something first. We'll eat meat when we get back. As Blake spoke, he handed a letter to the eagle owl. The eagle owl took the letter and flew away. He's quite a cold guy. Brock muttered to himself. He rushed to the magic wand shop. When Blake walked into Ollivander's magic wand shop, there was a big sign hanging on the magic wand shop that said temporarily closed. This was the first time in many years. When Blake walked in, Ollivander was still busy at the back of the shop. Mr. Ollivander. Oh, you're here. Ollivander walked out from the back. After not seeing him for a day, he looked much more haggard. It was as if he had aged 10 years. Wait a moment. I want to measure your data one last time. This is related to the material of your wand. Ollivander said and asked Blake to sit down. Then, he took out a strange ruler with several gemstones and handed it to Blake. Come on, wave it like a magic wand with all your might. Blake took the ruler obediently. Then, he waved it forcefully. Then, the gems on the ruler lit up one by one. In the end. Bang. Reimbursement for the ruler. Ollivander. What was the point of testing when the tools were already broken? If that's the case, it might not be feasible to use wood as the body of the staff. How about? As Ollivander spoke, he went to the back and continued to work. Please wait a moment. I might look for you to test it later. If I'm lucky. You're going to have your own magic wand today. Blake nodded. Okay. If it were a few days ago, he would have been very excited. But now. In fact, he already had a very powerful wand. So he wasn't that excited. Of course, he didn't feel guilty towards Ollivander or anything. After all, he had designed a magic wand that he could use. It was also the ultimate challenge that Ollivander had given him. This was something that both of them were willing to do. Blake was a little bored as he took a book on the table and flipped through it. Baker, on the other hand, stood quietly in the corner as if he was invisible. That book was actually a notebook. It was recorded inside. It seemed to be the content of wand studies. And looking at the scribbled handwriting inside. This must be some insights written by Mr. Ollivander. Blake closed the book, since it was written by Mr. Ollivander's experience. Then, without permission, it was better for him not to flip through it. His family had run a wand shop for so many years. There must be some trade secrets. Although the chances of trade secrets being casually placed on the counter were very low. But what if, at this moment, Mr. Ollivander happened to walk out with a new ruler? He happened to see Blake close the book. Oh, it doesn't matter. You can read it. I'm going to publish an introductory wand study book. This is the draft I wrote. I was just looking for someone to help me read it. Oh right, there are still some materials over there. You can also try it yourself after reading the book. There's no other way, you might have to stay here for a long time today. Because there are a lot of things to test today. I can come out at any time for you to test. Blake nodded. Then, he took the ruler from Ollivander's hand skillfully. He waved it forcefully. It was the same as the previous ruler. All the gems lit up. Then, buzz. The ruler made a buzzing sound. However, there was no explosion. Ollivander's face revealed a look of surprise. Oh, that's great. Quote. This means that I've finally found a suitable material for your wand. The material has been decided, then, the next step will be easy. You'll definitely get your own wand today. Ollivander ran into the back excitedly again. After Blake saw Ollivander enter. He was slightly bored. He picked up the manuscript and read it. The contents of the manuscript were easy to understand. It was indeed an introductory book to teach people the basics of wand studies. Blake was already proficient in beginner wand studies. On top of that, he also had a talent in the art of wands. This was a simple beginner's book. Naturally, he would understand it after reading it once. He could innovate after reading it twice. After reading the book, he saw that Ollivander hadn't come out yet. Blake came to a simple workbench with some materials on it. The study of wands and alchemy was somewhat related. It just so happened that Blake was also proficient in alchemy. Thus, he came up with several interesting ideas about combining wand and alchemy. It took shape in his mind. Blake couldn't wait to try it out. The little bit of boredom in his heart instantly vanished. Baker, help me get a chocolate pudding. Yes, little master. Baker almost fell asleep. Hearing the order, he immediately ran out excitedly. Take the money. Take the money and go again. Quote. After Baker went out, Blake picked up a carving knife. He began his experiment. He was going to make a magic wand that focused on attacking power. First of all, he had to choose the right materials. Unfortunately, there weren't many materials on the workbench to choose from. The staff was only made of a small piece of ebony wood. As for the core of the staff, Ollivander's core was made of 3 materials. Phoenix tail feather, dragon heart string, unicorn hair. He didn't even have these. There was only a small tuft of cheap horse-shaped water monster mane. This material was very unqualified as the core of the staff. It was an inferior material in the core of the staff. However, it was just right to use it as a practice material for newbies. This was also in Ollivander's beginner's book. It was one of the most cost-effective materials recommended for newbies to practice. Blake didn't care. He picked up the tool and started working. After an unknown amount of time, Blake picked up a wand that looked okay and nodded in satisfaction. Although the material was a little bad. But with the help of alchemy, this wand was already considered very good. In order to increase the power of the wand, he recited some of the magical ancient texts that he had learned not long ago, such as Niven. He used alchemy to engrave them directly on the inside of the wand. This was the simplest idea in Blake's mind just now. There was no other way, the materials were limited. If there were enough materials, he would choose to use the dragon heart string as the core of the wand. Then, he would use mithril to embed the ancient runes into the wand. Then, he would use alchemy to wrap the wand with other materials that could adapt to magic power. That way, the power would be even greater. Blake looked at the wand in his hand. He was eager to try. Although it looked like it could be used. But, if he didn't try, how would he know if it would succeed? However, he also knew his own situation. Although Dumbledore said that he just needed to take it easy, he could still use other wands. But, what if he didn't use enough strength? It would explode. This was the first wand he made. It would be a pity if it exploded. Blake hesitated again and again. In the end, he decided not to do it himself. He put down the wand. Then, he picked up the chocolate pudding beside him. The attentive baker even came with a plate and a small spoon for the pudding. At this moment, suddenly, there was a ringing sound at the door. Someone had come in. Blake looked at the door strangely. Because today, Mr. Ollivander put up a closed sign. Usually, no customers came in. Why is it you again? Cassandra frowned. Do you not want to see me? Blake scratched his head. I thought you went home. Cassandra said, I came to find Mr. Ollivander to get my custom-made wand. Blake remembered that there was indeed such a thing. Well, Mr. Ollivander isn't free yet. Why don't you wait for a while? Cassandra gritted her teeth. Although she didn't really want to stay with this infuriating guy. But if she left just like that, wouldn't it mean that she was afraid of him? So, Cassandra sat on the bench again. She curiously glanced at Baker, who was standing next to her, drowsy. This is your house elf. Yes, Baker. Go and buy me 3 cups of watermelon juice. Quote. Yes. Baker, who received the order again, was as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He rushed out of the door again. To be honest, compared to standing here and dozing off, he still preferred to run errands outside. Money. Give me the money. After seeing Beck off again, Blake sat back down on the workbench. He fiddled with the pile of materials. He was considering whether to make another one. Using another idea. What are you doing? Bored, Cassandra saw Blake busying himself. He couldn't help but ask curiously. I'm making a wand. Hey. By the way, can you help me test this wand? Quote. Blake didn't wait for Cassandra to object. Then, he stuffed the wand that he had personally made into her hand. Blake stared at her intently. Said in Mr. Ollivander's voice. Come. Wave it. Quote. Cassandra rolled her eyes. Thus, he casually waved his hand. Who? A gentle breeze blew through the entire magic wand shop. Cassandra's long blonde hair was blown up. It was as if a ray of light had illuminated her face. Cassandra's eyes widened in surprise. This wand. It seemed like. It's pretty useful. Oh. This wand seems to suit you very well. Quote. Miss Worley. Mr. Ollivander walked out quickly. Maybe you don't need to have it custom made. Let me see, which one is it? Then, Ollivander was dumbfounded. He had thought that Blake and Cassandra were bored. That was why he took his wand to try it out. Then, he happened to get a wand that suited Cassandra very well. But, Ollivander recognized any wand that he had made. But, he had never seen this wand before. Can I see it? Miss Worley. Quote. Cassandra handed the wand in her hand to Ollivander. After Ollivander took it, he carefully sized up the wand. Why does it feel like it's newly made? It also has the fragrance of wood. It hasn't even been covered with protective paint. A new wand. It's still in my shop. Ollivander looked at Blake in disbelief. Didn't you say that you could let me use the materials over there to practice? Blake scratched his head and said. You made this. Ollivander was dumbfounded. That's right. You've learned how to make a wand before. Ollivander asked in surprise. Nope, I've only read a few books about it. Then I tried to make it. Ollivander's eyes were about to pop out. Then, you made it. And you used the materials over there. Yes. Ollivander carefully checked the wand again. The body of the wand was made of black sandalwood. The core of the wand was indeed the mane of a horse-shaped water monster. Flowers bloom. Ollivander read. A flower immediately appeared at the tip of the wand. This, Ollivander looked at Blake in surprise. You can actually make a wand to such an extent with such an inferior wand core material. And it's your first time making a wand. Ding. Detected emotions of shock. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest. Quote. To be honest, this wand was in Ollivander's eyes. Some of the details were still a little rough. But strangely, it had the same quality as other wands. This was a little unreasonable. I used some alchemy knowledge. Of course, there are also some ancient texts. I engraved a few ancient texts inside the wand. Ollivander's interest was immediately piqued. Oh. Which ancient texts did you engrave? Quote. He had practiced combining alchemy and wandology before. The effect was indeed very good. But combining wandology and ancient texts? He really hadn't thought of it that way. This was a completely new topic. Just as the old man and the young man were chatting happily. Cough cough. A clear cough interrupted their discussion. Cassandra couldn't take it anymore. It was fine that she was ignored last time. It was the same this time. As the genius magical girl of the Worry family. Don't you care about your face? Oh. Cough cough. I'm very sorry. Miss Worley. Quote. Mr. Ollivander said somewhat embarrassedly. Clearly, he was aware of this as well. The key was that as long as Blake was here, she could always give him different surprises. Therefore, he always neglected Cassandra. The wand that was tailor-made for you is ready. I'll go get it now. Ollivander ran behind the counter again. Cassandra looked at Blake, who was still holding the wand in his hand. He couldn't help but ask, is this really your first time making this wand? That's right. I was looking through Mr. Ollivander's manuscript in the shop just now. Quote. Then, he told me that I could use these materials to practice after I finished reading them. Then I made it. Blake didn't finish his sentence. Then, he felt a fragrant breeze coming from beside him. A figure sat down next to her. I want to try too. Then you should take a look at Mr. Ollivander's introductory manuscript first. Ding. Anger from embarrassment detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest. Quote. Comma. After Cassandra got her wand, she didn't leave directly. She didn't even try. Instead, she picked up Ollivander's manuscript and read it seriously. Ollivander didn't object. His introductory manuscript. He originally wanted others to give him their opinions. He wanted to know why he wrote it like this. Could others understand it? Blake had read it before. But the opinions of a monster like him. It was simply unreferential. Relatively speaking. Cassandra was the real beginner. So, after Ollivander measured Blake's data, he went back to the back to get busy again. Little master. The watermelon juice is here. Quote. Baker walked into the shop. He was holding a tray in his hand. There were 3 cups of watermelon juice on the tray. Okay, thank you for your hard work. Blake casually picked up a glass of watermelon juice. Oh. Little master actually praised Baker. He said that Baker had worked hard. Quote. Little master is really the best master in the world. Quote. Okay. You send a glass to that young lady. You can drink the rest of the glass yourself. Oh. There's a glass for Baker to drink. Quote. Little master. Stop. Don't say any more, this is an order. Quote. Blake hurriedly stopped him from continuing to go crazy. Baker hurriedly shut his mouth. He snapped his fingers. On the tray, a glass of watermelon juice slowly floated to the table where Cassandra was reading attentively. Then he took a glass for himself. He hid in the corner and drank happily. Okay. I'm done reading. Quote. Cassandra put down the manuscript. Then she went straight to the workbench. She was ready to start working. I don't believe I can't do it. At this moment, Cassandra didn't know. The thoughts in her heart had already changed from the original. I must be better than him. If it becomes me, I will definitely be able to do it. However, how could making a magic wand be a simple matter? As a beginner, Cassandra, she couldn't even cut the body of the wand well. The body of the magic wand was made of wood with magic power. Therefore, it could only be cut by hand. It was impossible to use magic to make it. But how could you expect a young lady to know such meticulous carpentry? Even Blake. It was also because of his proficiency in beginner magic wand that he could make the body of the wand so good looking. Ahem, you're holding the knife in the wrong way. Ah, you should cut along the texture. No, you're cutting too much. Originally, Cassandra was very dissatisfied with Blake's blabbering. But, she didn't understand the main point at all. Only after reluctantly listening to Blake's words. Only then could he be considered to have successfully mastered it. However, her culinary skills were indescribable. After a long time, it was covered with wooden thorns. The body of the magic staff was full of holes. She appeared in front of Cassandra. It was even curved, although there were also curved wands. But they were bent on purpose. As for her, it was because she couldn't straighten it. Cassandra looked at the body of her wand. He then looked at the exquisite wand that Blake had just made. What did it mean that there would be no harm if there was no comparison? He had only spent so little time. Just like that, a complete wand was completed. And she. However, even the most basic part of the staff's body was not completed. Ding. Depression detected. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a silver treasure chest. Quote. Comma. Actually, as a beginner, you're already pretty good. Blake was telling the truth. Strictly speaking, he was not a beginner. With the help of the system, he was already at the level of a qualified wand craftsman. Coupled with his own ingenious ideas. Naturally, it was a success. Blake picked up Cassandra's terrible wand body. He picked up the carving knife and skillfully modified it. Under his hands, the body of the wand gradually became beautiful. Cassandra's eyes widened as she watched. You, how do you know everything? Cassandra looked at Blake in despair. No, I only know a little. Know a little. Who are you lying to? If you really only know a little about it, then you can shock Mr. Ollivander with your first time making a wand. Cassandra, who had always been strong. Once again, she was defeated by Blake. A strange feeling rose from the bottom of her heart. All right. It's finally done. Quote. Mr. Ollivander rushed out from behind. He interrupted Cassandra's thoughts. Give it a try. Don't take pity on him. Cast the spell with all your might. Quote. Blake put down the carving knife. He looked at the wand in Ollivander's hand. It was a silver wand. It was about 13 inches. It looked like it was made of some kind of metal. Blake took the wand. He felt that his hand was heavy. This wand was not light. The body of the wand is made of mithril. Using the wooden body of the wand, it can't withstand your full force casting at all. Blake held the handle of the wand. At first, he felt that it felt okay. He raised the wand. He pointed to a stool beside the counter. Whoosh. The next second, the chair turned into an exquisite sofa. Cassandra saw this scene. She gritted her teeth fiercely. Blake looked at the wand in his hand in surprise. It felt very good. Moreover, it was indeed very compatible with him. The key thing was, after he injected his magic power into it, the body of the wand was still stable. There was no explosion. Blake finished testing it. Then, he raised the wand again. He waved it forcefully. This time, he used all his strength. Both in terms of magic and physics. Whoosh. The sound of the wand cutting through the air rang out. Then, a crisp buzzing sound came from the wand. Buzz. The body of the mithril wand trembled for a moment. It slowly quieted down. The magic wand actually withstood the attack. Moreover, Blake also felt that this wand had increased his magic spell. Although it was not as abnormal as the custom-defined wand increase. But there was indeed an increase. It was much better than an ordinary wand. Ah, how wonderful. Mithril is indeed a good material. It's a pity that not everyone can use it. If you don't have enough magic power, mithril will absorb magic power instead. In other words, this is a wand that can only be used by you. No one else can use it. Ollivander's words. Blake understood. In other words, this wand was like a heavy broadsword. Although it could cut the hair. However, it wasn't something that just anyone could carry. In the evening. Broken Cauldron Bar. Dumbledore looked at Baker, who was standing at the side. Is this the house elf you were talking about, Beck? Yes. Blake nodded. I want him to stay. Because if he is chased back by me, he will be very miserable in the future. Quote. Then stay here. Dumbledore nodded. Although Grindelwald sent a house elf scissors, he was very dissatisfied. But this was indeed more thoughtful, thought Grindelwald. He was so be. It was indeed rare for her to be by Blake's side. There was a house elf. He could indeed take good care of Blake's life. And he showed kindness for Blake. He felt gratified. He was actually thinking for the house elf. How nice. Because Blake had already obtained his wand. Therefore, he had no reason to continue staying in Diagon Alley. Therefore, he had to return to Godric Valley at night. The past few days had been quite fulfilling. The kind that had a lot of gains. It was a pity that the seed that he had been thinking about. But he didn't buy it. After dinner, Blake went back to his room and began to pack his luggage. Of course, when he returned to his room, he found that his luggage had been completely packed by Baker. Blake smiled approvingly at Baker. There was a house elf. It could indeed save him a lot of trouble. Flutter. The sound of flapping wings was heard. An owl flew in from outside the window. It stopped directly on the table. At first, Blake thought it was his eagle owl. He didn't expect it to be a small owl. It had a small cloth bag in its mouth. After seeing Blake, it threw the small cloth bag on the table. Then it flew away. Blake opened the cloth bag curiously. Inside, he saw a large pile of seeds in a messy manner. They were the ones that he had been thinking about. This, Blake was pleasantly surprised. He hurriedly covered his mouth. If Dumbledore saw these things, they would definitely be confiscated. At this moment, he found a note in the small bag. I have a lot of these seeds at home. You're the only one who hasn't seen the world and wants them so much. Quote. Well, seeing that you're so pitiful, I just packed some for you. Take it or leave it. Signed, Cassandra Worley. Blake looked at the small note with a stunned expression. He didn't expect the seeds that he had been thinking about. The seeds that he thought would be difficult to get. They were actually sent over by Cassandra. At night, Blake stayed in his room. He silently opened the system space. He looked at the 9 silver treasure chests and 1 gold treasure chest in the system space and fell into deep thought. The system's rule of dropping treasure chests. The stronger the target's personal ability, the more intense the emotions. The probability of dropping treasure chests would increase. At the same time, the probability of dropping high-quality treasure chests would increase. In other words, a very important factor. That was luck. If he was unlucky, even if it was Dumbledore's emotions, there was also a possibility of failing to draw treasure chests. Therefore, although these few days have been very fulfilling, but my luck is very bad. There is obviously a higher probability of dropping gold treasure chests and above. Blake shook his head helplessly. It was a matter of luck. He had no choice. System. Open 9 silver treasure chests in one go. Quote. Blake didn't want to waste time. This time, he directly opened 9 in a row. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining beginner mastery of magical zoology. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining beginner mastery of potions. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 1000 experience points in herbalism. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining beginner mastery of prophecy. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 1000 experience points in transformation. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining advanced prophecy talent. As the host already has a superb prophecy talent, the reward is automatically converted to 1000 experience points in prophecy. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 1000 experience points in potions. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 5000 gold coins. Quote. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining a mutated devil's web seed. Quote. Blake looked at the 9 rewards. He frowned slightly. Experience. This was the first time he heard this word from the system. If there was experience points, did it mean that the system actually had an experience bar? But, where was the experience bar? Blake remembered the keyword experience from before. Then he shouted tentatively. Experience bar. The system didn't respond. Skill experience. The system still didn't respond. Then, the system panel. Ding. Opening the system panel for the host. Quote. He looked at the virtual screen in front of him. Blake's face darkened. He gritted his teeth and said, System manual. Ding. System manual download failed. Quote. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel.